Chapter 2057. When Wan Shan received the notice, he put aside all the meetings and rushed over immediately. Recently, Jiang Joshi's thoughts were all on Wei Wei Bai. As a result, his workload increased. However, it was obvious that the big boss was in a good mood. When the boss was in a good mood, it was not a big deal to have more work. If the boss like Jiang Joshi was in a bad mood, even if you did not have a job, you could still live a life worse than death. When Jiang Joshi rushed over, he saw that the entire dance troupe was detained in the room. No one could leave. And Jiang Joshi sat in front of the dance troupe. His eyes were extremely cold and his expression was extremely frightening. Continue. The leader was trembling in fear. Wei Wei said that she had to leave the dance troupe because her parents were dead, so she told us in advance. I also gave her the salary in advance. Jiang Joshi looked at the leader coldly. When did she say that? The leader tried to count the time and finally said uncertainly, at least a week ago. Jiang Joshi seemed to be a little surprised when he heard this time. A week ago. A week ago, wasn't that the time when he asked someone to pretend to be her parents and call her? Later, Bai Weiwei called twice, and then she didn't call again. He thought that she was obedient and did not have the heart to add more burden to him. Or maybe she was afraid that he would have bad thoughts about her and did not want to continue to beg him and let him do whatever he wanted. That was why she did not dare to call him. He did not expect that it was because she knew it from the beginning. Wasn't it Mr. and Mrs. Bai on the other end of the phone? How did she find out? Jiang Joshi's expressionless face had a cold and gloomy feeling. He enunciated each word clearly. Oh, my little girl has grown up. She had learned to lie. She had been good to him during this period of time, but it was actually to numb him. Then she would use the loophole in the dance troupe to find a chance to escape today. She was very thoughtful. She threw away the phone and the card he gave her. There was a GPS system in the phone. The card was where she could find the money if she dared to withdraw it. Although she was cute and naive, she was not stupid at all. Jiang Joshi lowered his eyes and stared at his hands. These hands, they had touched her last night. But today, she was like a happy bird and left him alone and ran away. Jiang Joshi did not know how he was feeling. He should have calmly told himself that she was just a girl. He did not feel anything at all. Even if he did feel it, it was just a little. He had been suppressing his feelings to prevent himself from being moved by her, but it seemed to be of no use. Why didn't she? Was who was why? Why? Why didn't you tell me about her resignation? Don't you know I'm her man? He shouldn't have vented his anger. He didn't interfere with the dance troupe. Shan not Tang Tang dance there seemed to be a vague thought in his heart. It would be best if the dance troupe went bankrupt, and Bai Weiwei had no place to dance. Joshi. Shan was she. More than that, he wanted to leave a place for her to be free. He did not want to hurt her because of his terrible possessiveness. Jiang Joshi's expression was too ugly. The leader was scared out of his wits. Wan Shan looked at Jiang Joshi and felt that something was wrong. He immediately came over and pushed the wheelchair for him. President Jiang, we're looking for her. Miss Bai is not fast. She can't have gone far. If a person wanted to leave, it would depend on that person's personality. Chapter 2058. A girl with Wei Wei Bai's personality wouldn't be able to run far even if she wanted to. After all, she was naive and thought that as long as she left, no one would be able to find her. Therefore, she wouldn't go to the trouble of running particularly far away or even overseas. Jiang Joshi stared at the people in the dance troupe with a murderous look in his eyes. In the end, he returned to normal and closed his eyes coldly. Go back. When Wan Shan pushed him out, the murderous look in Jiang Joshi's eyes was replaced by a feeling of loneliness and decadence. He heard his big boss mumble to himself, so the love these past few days was actually a deliberate lie to please her. Wan Shan felt a chill in his heart. He didn't dare to look into Jiang Joshi's eyes. Jiang Joshi glanced at the glass wall in front of him. His eyes were empty and cold, burning with a terrible flame. His chest was cold. This week, her care was deliberately close to him. His proud calmness and rational cunning were all smashed to pieces. He suddenly reached out to support his aching forehead and couldn't help but laugh softly. This laugh made Wan Shan feel unwell all over. Then he heard Jiang Joshi's voice as if it was floating from the abyss. "Find the person for me." His voice was bone-chilling with a trace of hatred. Wan Shan suddenly felt sorry for Wei Wei Bai, who ran away. Jiang Joshi was really mad. Wei Wei Bai carried the food and went to the old people's home. She had been a free volunteer at the old people's home this month. The old people's home was kind enough to provide her with 2 free meals. There was nothing else they could do. After all, the revenge of the little angel in the side mission was too fucked up. How could little angels take revenge? Little angels were all good at persuading people. Therefore, she could only pack up and run away when she found out that her parents were dead. She even left a note saying something like, "I hate you." This was heart-wrenching revenge. The system actually approved of it. He felt that her revenge was very much in line with Little White Flower's character, so he didn't punish her. However, there was an additional progress bar for the side quest. Her week of deceit and the revenge note had only advanced the sliver by less than 1/10. If before the main quest was completed. The bar wasn't full yet, so she could only do an epileptic dance with the system, back to back. Moreover, even if there was no strategy, Little White Flower's character could not be broken. She had originally planned to live a good life after leaving Jiang Joshi. She wanted to have a good life with a little wolf dog to relieve her boredom. In the end, a long strip pressed down on his head. He could only obediently follow his character settings and become a street sweeper. Because the little angel is kind and beautiful, she likes to help others the most. He. Wei Wei Bai carried her things into the nursing home. When the old people saw that it was her, they immediately smiled happily. "Wei Wei is here, my dear granddaughter." "Xiao Wei, I told you not to bring anything. It's too expensive. Be good and come here. Grandma will give you some pocket money." Wei Wei Bai had become a mascot. She was well-behaved and soft. She spoke sweetly and was hard-working. She was beautiful. She was simply the most popular person among the grandma generation. In this day and age, where could one find a girl with a personality like Wei Wei Bai? Therefore, in less than a month after she came, everyone treated her like their own granddaughter and doted on her. Wei Wei Bai smiled sweetly. She immediately took out the hot mung bean pastries from the bag. "This doesn't cost money. I helped Master Gao carry the dishes. He gave it to me." Chapter 2059. Master Gao was the son of one of the old men. He was a pastry chef who specialized in making pastries for people in the hotel. Wei Wei Bai distributed boxes of delicious, sweet, and soft pastries to the old man. "This isn't very sweet, and it doesn't stick to the teeth, but it's very healthy." It was very suitable for the old man's taste. Bai Wei Wei coaxed everyone to be very happy. The old people in the nursing home were all lonely, and their children rarely came to visit. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai was like a little angel to the old people. After delivering the pastries, Wei Wei Bai started to tidy up the bedding, move the chairs, and clean for a living. When she was doing this, she was very focused and diligent. She didn't care that her fair and tender fingers were red and scratched from doing housework. The old people also told her to rest from time to time. Then, they would pass her water and wipe her sweat. Wei Wei Bai felt that this life was better than hooking up with a little puppy, although it was a little worse. But it wasn't by much. Didn't they see that the grandma and grandpa doted on her all the way? She was everyone's favorite in this courtyard. After finishing the work, Wei Wei Bai was about to leave. One of the old ladies who was close to her grabbed her hand and smiled so widely that her golden teeth were exposed. Wei Wei, Grandma's grandson. He's only 2 years older than you. Wei Wei Bai's expression was calm. She was already used to it. This was the 18th time that she had introduced her grandson to her. Sure enough, the old lady took out a photo. The boy in the photo was really fair and tender. He looked like a little puppy. He's working in a very powerful company not long after he graduated this year. That company is very famous. It seems that the big boss's income is in the top 10 in the world this year. It's a lot. Wei Wei Bai, top 10. Oh, it seemed that Jiang Joshi had indeed entered the top 10 in the world this year. This was a coincidence. No, 9 of the top 10 billionaires were in other places. The remaining one was in the local area. It was Jiang Joshi's company. Wei Wei Bai frowned and said to the system, "What is Jiang Joshi doing? Have you found me?" The system replied, "It's locked, I can't see it." The little angel side quest suddenly locked onto Jiang Joshi's long-range surveillance. She didn't know what Jiang Joshi was doing this month. Even if he wanted to find a way to meet that guy, it would be difficult. More than half a year had passed since they had started the raid. If he left for too many months, even if the favorability didn't drop, he wouldn't be able to do anything. If he wanted to raid them in the future, time would be too tight. However, it wasn't appropriate for her to suddenly run into Jiang Joshi's territory. If Jiang Joshi suddenly hardened his heart and wanted to kill her, did she hit her head and go blind? After all, that guy, Jiang Joshi, was really sick. Wei Wei Bai had met many perverts, so she was very wary of men with such personalities. Therefore, she had to check if Jiang Joshi's recent behavior was abnormal. Only then could she make the next step of the plan. Wei Wei Bai thought for a moment and felt that it was worth the risk, so she asked the old lady's grandson to check. What had Jiang Joshi been doing recently? Therefore, the old lady nagged a bunch of good words about her grandson being obedient, filial, and responsible. Wei Wei Bai blushed shyly, then nodded and said, "Then, let's meet." These words were out of her mouth. The old lady was pleasantly surprised. After all, so many people had been rejected by Wei Wei Bai, but she was the only one who succeeded. It must be because her grandson was too handsome. The old lady was very active, and she immediately arranged a time for the blind date. The university student who had just graduated seemed to have secretly come to the nursing home to see Wei Wei Bai. He was immediately shocked. Chapter 2060. He had met his goddess. He even set Wei Wei Bai's photo on the desktop of his work computer. When he was tired from work, he would take a look and look forward to the day of the blind date. Luan Shan held a stack of documents and hesitated for a long time. Only then did he dare to push open the office door and sneak in. In the extremely cold and empty office, Jiang Joshi sat in front of the table with a glass of water beside him. His hair was a little long, and his face was a little thinner, making his already handsome face look even sharper and gloomier. Luan Shan carefully placed some documents that needed to be signed beside him. It had been 7 or 8 days since the second surgery. Jiang Joshi's leg had recovered very well. Next, as long as he had a good rest, he would undergo almost a year of rehabilitation. Other than a little limp, there were basically no problems with his leg. Even the doctor said that the surgery could be so successful. It was simply a miracle. In fact, if one understood Jiang Joshi's life, no one doubted it. The miracle was actually that the man in front of him was not just his leg. The search for Wei Wei Bai was still going on. But Jiang Joshi was surprisingly calm. On the day Wei Wei Bai left, he looked cold and desperate. Luan Shan did not see him again. But this month's work made them tremble in fear. It was especially depressing. Whether it was eating or performing surgeries, Jiang Joshi still arranged everything clearly. He didn't give up on himself because he didn't see Bai Weiwei. But Luan Shan had some strange behavior towards Jiang Joshi. He was still afraid. For example, he would occasionally ask him, "What do you think of breaking a person's leg?" It was not very good. It was very scary. Or, "What material is the chain made of?" It won't hurt people. There was too much information in this question and he could not answer it. What was even more terrifying was that he would occasionally hear his big boss muttering to himself gloomily, "Run far away and don't come back. No one who dares to lie to me has a good ending, except for these weird little problems." The boss was actually quite normal. After Jiang Joshi finished signing, he said, "Let's start the meeting." The workaholic boss was back. The meeting proceeded smoothly. Luan Shan sorted out the information. A new employee turned on the computer and was recording the meeting materials. Luan Shan pushed Jiang Joshi, who was still resting, and was about to go out. But he heard Jiang Joshi say, "Wait a minute." Luan Shan stopped in his tracks. However, he found that Jiang Joshi was looking at the employee who had finished recording the information and was about to leave. That employee looked young and delicate. Jiang Joshi stared coldly at the employee for a while before saying, "Who allowed you to put the photo on the table?" The employee was at a loss. He suddenly realized that the big boss was talking to him. He was a little excited and nervous. He immediately said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Jiang. I didn't know that I couldn't change the desktop photo. I'll change it right away." He was not thinking of anything else at all. The employee opened the desktop and was about to modify it. Suddenly, a hand pressed on the keyboard, stopping his actions. The employee was stunned, but he saw Jiang Joshi's gaze fall on the photo. Jiang Joshi looked at it for a while before asking, "Where did you get this photo?" At first, he thought that it was a photo on Wei Wei Bai's Weibo. Because she had a popular Weibo account, although she had not posted on Weibo recently, there were still many fans who cared about looks. But this photo was obviously taken recently in an unfamiliar place. The employee was a little shy. "This is the girl I like." Luan Shan's eyes twitched. Sure enough, he saw Jiang Joshi's cold gaze fall on the employee. The employee looked excited. He did not have the ability to read people at all. "She's very good. She volunteers at the nursing home every day." Jiang Joshi, volunteer? "Yes, my grandma said that a kind girl like her is the most suitable to marry." Jiang Joshi, marry? The employee's voice became shy. "I took a peek at her. The photo was given to me by my grandma. She took it outside the nursing home." Jiang Joshi, is that so? She sounds like a very good girl. You like her quite a lot. Luan Shan felt that the atmosphere had become even more oppressive. The employee immediately nodded. She agreed to go on a blind date with me. I was happy for a long time. Suddenly, the atmosphere was stagnant. Jiang Joshi was silent for a while. Then he opened his mouth slightly and asked in a neutral tone, "Blind date?" Then he curved his lips. "Seems like she's been living well after leaving me." These words were so cold that it made one's hair stand on end. The full article is at https://www. Sashu. Com slash. The. Chapter 2061. Wei Wei Bai opened the menu. The restaurant was not expensive, and the environment was good. It seemed that the grandson of the old lady had good taste. The little boy was not here yet, so Wei Wei Bai chatted with the system. Stir-fried bamboo shoots are good, and stewed pork trotters, fried prawns. She chose 5 or 6 dishes in a row. The system quickly stopped her. 2 people can't eat that much, don't scare the man away on your first blind date. Recently, Wei Wei Bai had been eating the food from the nursing home. The elderly had a lighter taste and were softer. Wei Wei Bai was not used to it, but she could not stop the side mission from forcing her to do good deeds. She also had to maintain the little angel and not despise others. It was so light in her mouth that there was no taste. However, she found that the side mission gave her a progress reward. When she maintained the little angel to do good deeds, she did not break down because of the character setting. The side mission thought that she was very serious about completing the mission. Although she did not torture Jiang Joshi. But she had the attitude. So she added a little bit to the progress bar. It was better than nothing. Bai Weiwei also chose a light cucumber and clam chowder. Don't stop me, I'm here to eat, not to go on a blind date. The system said, no, you're here to trick the male lead staff and to ask for information about the male lead, not to eat. Weiwei Bai was stunned. Yeah, I almost forgot about Jiang Joshi. Actually, she had been living quite well recently. She did not need a guide, it was more like she was resting. She was living a very comfortable life. After all, Jiang Joshi was very difficult to get along with, and she had to pretend to be a little angel and act coquettishly with him every day. It was not a job that humans could do. Weiwei Bai felt that it was really hard for her. Weiwei Bai silently shed a tear of sympathy for herself. She had to think about the mission even when she was eating. So, she would think about other things after eating. Weiwei Bai asked the waiter to take the dishes, then said to the system, why did the side mission lock the remote monitoring for no reason? The system said, the reason given in the note is to maintain your persona and increase the difficulty for you. And it's also my fault. Weiwei Bai paused in the middle of wiping her hands with a napkin. Your fault. The system was a little dejected. I don't have enough power, so the fact that I gave you too many cheats has been discovered. Weiwei Bai fell silent. System, are you touched by his sacrifice? Weiwei Bai finally spoke, when did you cheat on me? Then, the system felt wronged and exploded. Fuck, I didn't give you a cheat. Spying on the male lead every day and reporting his whereabouts to you, this is a treatment that other hosts would never get, hey. This required the system's energy. Which system was so hardworking, spending its own money, eating its own food, and even finding work for itself. The system would not exploit the host. He didn't threaten the host every day that he would die if he didn't complete the mission. It was not a normal system. Also, I bought discounted items for you in the supermarket every day. Other systems would not be so kind, discounted items are hard to buy. I guarded the supermarket door with a bunch of system aunties every day, snatching discounted items from them. It's not easy at all. Thinking about it, it used to be a famous system. In the end, it became a member of the supermarket aunties, all for the sake of the host. The host actually complained that it did not have enough cheats. The system looked as if the heavens had no eyes. Your soul is weak. Every time I protect an ingrate like you through the soul channel, I can't bear to see you get hurt even if I get hurt myself. The more it said, the more wronged it felt. Weiwei Bai felt like she could see the system emitting dark resentment. To read the https://www.sashu.com/ to read the full text, https://www.sashu.com to download the full text, https://www.sashu.com to read the full text, https://m.sashu.com. Chapter 2062. She immediately comforted it. Tong Zi, don't be angry. Of course I know you gave me a cheat. No. Wei Wei Bai paused and slowly revealed a touched and beautiful smile. You are my biggest cheat. The system was speechless. Suddenly, it was touched by an arrow. The system was satisfied. Then it continued to embroider. The virtuous wife and loving mother system was in the process of being completed. Wei Wei Bai, Tong Zi has been too gullible recently, I'm not used to it. After ordering the dishes, Wei Wei Bai turned on her phone and played a game. She did not know what Jiang Joshi was doing now. It was normal that the favorability did not increase. But it was not normal that it did not drop. Could it be that the note did not torture him? Wei Wei Bai reached out and swiped twice on her phone, her mind blank. She had too many plans in her mind, so at least she could relax her mind when playing games. Not far behind her, a slender figure slowly walked over. His cold eyes reflected her thin back view. He stood at the door with his hands in his pockets. His long black hair almost covered his eyes under his forehead. The faint yellow light shone under his nose, drawing a lonely outline. He looked at her for a while and realized that her long hair was not tied up, but simply draped over her shoulders. Her ink-black hair fell to her waist, sparkling under the light. He finally approached her slowly. His walking posture was a little crooked when his legs were not obvious. Wei Wei Bai was playing the game when the system suddenly whispered. Hey, he's here. Wei Wei Bai did not think much of it. The little puppy is here. The system said, no, your big wolf dog is here. Wei Wei Bai paused. Before she could turn around, a hand landed lightly on her shoulder. This hand did not use much strength. But it made Wei Wei Bai stiffen. She lowered her head, still holding her phone in her hand. The Tetris game on her phone died quickly because there was no operation. Wei Wei likes to play games. The voice of the man behind her was cold, but there was a hint of suppressed laughter in his tone. It was like a poisonous snake hissing in his ears. Wei Wei Bai's ears were sensitive, and she quickly blushed. However, her face turned pale in an instant. Jiang Joshi's hand gently traced the contours of her beautiful shoulders to her neck. Her fragile neck was controlled by his fingers. Jiang Joshi finally breathed a sigh of relief. This month of coldness and twisted pain. He was finally appeased. Just as Jiang Joshi was about to reach out and hug the girl that he had lost and found again, a voice rang out. The waiter carrying the dishes suddenly walked over. Sir, please make way. The dishes are here. These words were like a clap of thunder. Wei Wei Bai, who was stunned with fear, suddenly woke up. She reached out and pushed Jiang Joshi away. Then she ran out without a care in the world. This action was so fast, forceful, and decisive. Jiang Joshi didn't expect her to have such a strong burst of strength. She ran away in an instant. He slowly turned around and felt a piercing pain in his leg. But when he saw the figure running to the door without a care in the world, for some reason, he forgot the doctor's words for a moment. Only the matter of her running away, the suppressed emotions during this period of time completely exploded. Jiang Joshi suddenly chased after her. The pain in his leg was getting more and more obvious, but the violent anger in Jiang Joshi's eyes made him want to chase after her even if he had to cripple his leg that had just undergone surgery. Wei Wei Bai might have been too flustered. Her leg tripped over the decorative ribbon at the door and she fell heavily to the ground. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://sashu.com/. Chapter 2063. Jung Joshi caught up with her. When he saw her fall, his pupils constricted. But he didn't show any pity. Instead, he pursed his thin, pale lips and looked at her gloomily. Then, he reached out and pulled at the decorative ribbons. He squatted down with great effort and reached out to pull at her hands. Then, he wrapped the ribbons around her wrists and body. He tied her up viciously and skillfully. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment. She stared blankly at Jung Joshi. Finally, she said with trembling lips, "Jung Joshi, what are you doing? Let go of me." She finally knew fear. "Run, I'll let you run." Jung Joshi's eyes were fierce and irritable. The pain in his leg made his expression not much better than Wei Wei Bai's. The waiter and a few customers rushed up. "What are you doing? Call the police." Others thought that Jung Joshi was a kidnapper. However, Jung Joshi didn't care. He reached out to carry Wei Wei Bai and left. Luan Shan and a few bodyguards guarding the door outside. When they saw their big boss at the door, they were courting death. They were so scared that they immediately ran in. For a moment, the scene was very chaotic. But these things were quickly controlled. Luan Shan came forward to settle the people in the restaurant and didn't cause a big commotion. Jung Joshi was halfway through carrying Wei Wei Bai, but he couldn't hold on to the struggling Wei Wei Bai. His leg couldn't take such a strong force. He breathed heavily. "Continue if you want me to die." Wei Wei Bai also felt that something was wrong. She looked up and saw that Jung Joshi's face was frighteningly pale. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. His eyes were so deep that they couldn't see the bottom. Even his lips were pale. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled, and her hands and feet turned cold. She seemed to be frightened by his appearance. Luan Shan immediately came over and supported Jung Joshi. However, Jung Joshi didn't care. He reluctantly carried Wei Wei Bai and stuffed her into the car at the entrance. He sat in the car. Luan Shan immediately ran to the driver's seat to start the car. "Director Jiang, let's go to the hospital first." Jung Joshi's face was pale, but he stared at Wei Wei Bai expressionlessly. "Go home." His voice was cold and indifferent. Luan Shan moved his lips and finally advised, "You can't hurt your leg a second time. If you want to stand up and walk normally in the future, you have to go to the hospital now." Wei Wei Bai was tied into a ball by a flower ribbon. She stared at him blankly, her eyes empty and vacant. But when she heard Luan Shan's words, she couldn't help but look down at his legs. However, Jung Joshi reached out and pinched Wei Wei Bai's cheek, forcing her to look up. "Anyway, I've been disabled for so many years. I don't lack time. I have more important things to do." Luan Shan was really speechless. He could only call the doctor in advance and ask the doctor to wait at home. The car soon started to move. There was silence in the car. Jung Joshi stared at Wei Wei Bai's face that was forced to look up. She didn't lose weight, and her complexion was very good. Jung Joshi smiled coldly and suddenly lowered his head to kiss her lips. This kiss was too rough and scary. Wei Wei Bai was so scared that her whole body stiffened. Suddenly, she lifted her free leg and kicked fiercely. Jung Joshi reached out and firmly pinched her leg that kicked over. It was so painful that Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with tears. Jung Joshi slowly moved away from her, reached out his finger, and wiped the corner of her eye. Looking at her red and unwilling eyes, he couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. "You're here for a blind date. The soft love in Wei Wei Bai's eyes was gone. There was only panic and awkwardness. Jiang Joshi acted as if he didn't see it. Instead, he stubbornly held her face in his hands. You've only been away from me for a month, and you've already hooked a man. Chapter 2064. Bai Weiwei finally got angry. Her almond eyes were bright and clear, with a kind of limpid purity. Jiang Joshi, I hate you. My parents are dead. Jiang Joshi held her face. His expression was playful, and there was even a scary smile. How did you know? The voice actors that I've hired are all the most expensive in their respective fields. Bai Weiwei gritted her teeth, bared her fangs and brandished her claws, and glared at him childishly. Jiang Joshi's fingers slowly touched her face. Aren't you going to say it? Let me think about who your blind date is. Weiwei Bai immediately panicked. Don't implicate others. Why are you so bad? Jiang Joshi's pale lips curled up slightly. His voice was cold and gentle. I'm so bad. Did you just find out? No, you were too stupid at the beginning. You thought I was a good person. But why couldn't she always think of him as a good person? Why did she expose him? If she always thought of him as a good person and liked him, then he wouldn't be unable to suppress the dark thoughts of dragging her into hell. But the little angel found out the devil's true colors. She didn't like him. She wanted to run away. How could that be? Jiang Joshi laughed coldly. Who gave her such stupid courage to leave after provoking him? Weiwei Bai's almond-shaped eyes were round and watery. She finally couldn't help but choke and say, because they are not my parents. They are very similar, but I can hear it. No matter how similar they were not her parents. Weiwei Bai sobbed. Is it those two urns? Is it? She still made the connection. Jiang Joshi looked at her silently. His face was pale, but there was a kind of arrogance and madness. He spoke softly, saying words that made people despair. Yes, it's them. Weiwei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore. The pain she had suppressed for a month exploded. I hate you. You must have killed them. Otherwise, why would you hide it? Why would you lie to me? You said you would let them have a good life, you big liar. Tears fell from her eyes. She cried pitifully and forcefully. Luan Shan, who was driving in the front and had turned himself into the background, thought to himself, Boss has gone overboard. He said that he can't hide it, but he still did. Karma, karma. Jiang Joshi coldly wiped away her tears with his fingers. But soon, new tears gushed out from her beautiful eyes. Jiang Joshi was extremely calm. You knew that I was lying to you, so you were so gentle to me. Was it because you were preparing to run away? Weiwei Bai was quick to speak, and her voice was weak from crying. Yes, who would like a murderer like you? Jiang Joshi's fingers paused. His eyes were fixed on her face. Then, he laughed at himself. Is that so? This expression was a little creepy. Weiwei Bai couldn't help but take a look at the progress of the abuse points bar. She was crying and throwing a tantrum without any vicious means of revenge. The bar actually moved forward a little. Weiwei Bai's hand had already struggled out of the flower ribbon. She was about to push him away. But this action undoubtedly woke up Jiang Joshi, who was stiff all over. He suddenly reached out and pressed her shoulder. Then, he took out a handkerchief from his pocket. The handkerchief gave off a pungent smell. It was anesthetic. Jiang Joshi's face showed a cruel expression. He firmly and coldly pressed the handkerchief to her mouth and nose. At first, Weiwei Bai could still struggle a few times, trying to break free. But soon, her eyes lost focus and her fingers lost strength. Jiang Joshi let go of the handkerchief and stretched out his hand. Finally, a gentle smile appeared on his face. Sleep. Be good. Luan Shan, who was sitting in front of him, Jiang Joshi picked up Wei Wei Bai. Then, a trace of fragile pain finally appeared on his face. The sharp pain in his foot made his face unusually pale. He said softly, I don't want to hurt her. I can only do this. This month, he had been suppressing himself for too long. When he saw Wei Wei Bai just now, he couldn't even suppress his violent desire to hurt her. So, he couldn't let her hate him anymore. Otherwise, he might not be able to control his strength and hurt her. Luan Shan, it wasn't a question of whether he would hurt her or not. But why did the boss hide an anesthetic handkerchief in his pocket? This question was very scary. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 2065. Luan Shan felt that his outlook on life had been terribly impacted. After returning, Jiang Joshi very obediently accepted the doctor's treatment. He even asked the doctor to leave a box of anesthetic injections. He said that sometimes when he was in pain, it could be used. Wait, you can't be anesthetized even if you take painkillers in pain. The doctor actually gave it. Luan Shan felt that he had come to a large-scale crime scene. Unfortunately, the salary was high. Otherwise, he would have found his conscience long ago. Then Luan Shan and the doctor were chased out. Jiang Joshi was having a hard time after being tormented like this. He had 2 bone-setting surgeries in a row this month. In addition, he had been suffering from insomnia all night. He was so tired that his face was blue. He couldn't find Wei Wei Bai. It completely shattered the calmness he was so proud of. It turned out that she had gone to become a volunteer and was hiding in such a remote nursing home. No wonder he couldn't find her. During this period of time, Jiang Joshi had searched all the immigration records and various surveillance cameras in the surrounding cities. He had paid a lot of manpower and financial resources. Even if he thought that she couldn't have gone far, he would have run to a hotel. He even used the power of the subordinates to help in the rented apartment on the ground floor. However, he found nothing. He had never been so tired. His mind and body had reached their limits. Jiang Joshi slowly walked to the bed with his crutches. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai was still sleeping quietly, he reached out and touched her face. He looked at her for a long time. The deep darkness in his eyes lit up little by little. Then he got on the bed and hugged her in his arms. He buried his head in her clean and fragrant hair and gently closed his eyes to sleep. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes. What she saw was the scumbag Jiang Joshi's haggard sleeping face. She knew that he was sick. She didn't know that he was holding anesthetic in his pocket. The system had finished embroidering the flower and was breaking melon seeds. Seeing Wei Wei Bai wake up, she said, "The male lead didn't do anything. He just hugged you to sleep." Wei Wei Bai felt a little dizzy. She nodded to show that she understood. Then, he discussed with the system, "Is there a boundary for the little angel's revenge? It's hard for me to figure it out alone." She said that she had to maintain the image of a little angel and take revenge. But the character setting of this plane was the epitome of a little white flower. She was just short of growing wings. No matter how she retaliated, she felt that she would vomit blood. The system flipped through the information and finally found some details. "If we can take revenge on him verbally, we can scold him however we want." Wei Wei Bai nodded. "You can also write to scold him. It doesn't matter how you scold him." Wei Wei Bai, is there any better way to take revenge than to curse? Jiang Joshi was like a dead pig. Even if he scolded himself until he became mute, he wouldn't be moved at all. The system replied, "That's it. The side quest requires you to curse Jiang Joshi to death with your mouth. Also, little angels don't hurt people, don't kill people, and don't attack physically. This quest requires you to attack spiritually. You can't just pick up a knife and kill the male lead." Wei Bai, what the hell was this quest? Wasn't it making things difficult for her? The system concluded, you just have to make the male lead sad. It doesn't matter how sad he is. You're not picky. Being sad will increase your abuse value. Violent, simple, and direct. Wei Bai, can I make him a cuckold? The system pondered for a moment. This breaks the character setting. Of course, if you can take it, you can cheat while vomiting blood. Wei Bai, she thought of herself grabbing a handsome guy and vomiting blood while saying, "I love you." Wei Bai couldn't take it anymore and trembled. The save button. Chapter 2066. Jiang Joshi seemed to have sensed something. His eyelids fluttered and his eyes were clear and sharp. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked unusually scary. He stared unwaveringly at Bai Weiwei. His eyes, as sharp as a knife, swept over her face and finally landed on her almond eyes. Wei Bai stared at him without moving. There was clear disgust in her eyes without a trace of emotion. Jiang Joshi looked at her for a long time. His expression was indifferent and he didn't say anything. Instead, he reached out and touched her hair. "Do you feel uncomfortable?" The anesthetic made her feel a little dizzy and thirsty. Wei Bai gritted her teeth and looked at him warily. She didn't say anything. Jiang Joshi got up slowly. His clothes were a little messy and his collar was wide open. Half of his shoulders were exposed. Wei Bai looked away and didn't want to look at him. Her face couldn't help but turn red. Jiang Joshi's gaze fell on her face and he said calmly, "Is it fun outside? You don't even want to dance and want to go out." Wei Bai's mouth twitched as if she wanted to imitate his cold smile. In the end, she failed, but she still knew how to scold him. Her voice was cold. "Of course it's fun without you." Her heart didn't hurt. This proved that these words didn't hurt Jiang Joshi at all. As expected, Jiang Joshi didn't get angry. Instead, he held her hand and kissed her fingers. As if he was feeling something. Then he sighed comfortably. "It's okay. It's good that you're back." He didn't care or get angry. He treated it as if she was throwing a tantrum and fed her a glass of water. Knowing that her hands and feet were still numb, he didn't move her. Wei Bai felt that Jiang Joshi was really too stable. He was indeed a man who had climbed from the bottom to his current position. Scolding really didn't hurt Jiang Joshi. During the month when she ran away, he was so angry when he saw her, but he suppressed it immediately. This kind of temperament was too resolute. After Jiang Joshi brought her back, life returned to normal. He touched her face as if he was trying to feel something. Then, with his walking stick in hand, he slowly walked out to give instructions to the nanny. Meanwhile, Wei Bai's limbs had more or less recovered their strength. She got up stealthily and peeked through the door. "The male lead is looking at you." There were surveillance cameras everywhere in the house. It was scary. Wei Bai said, "So what? What hasn't he seen before?" System, there was too much information in this sentence. He suspected that the host was driving, but he also felt that he was overthinking things. Wei Bai's face was pale. She glanced around the living room, but there was no one there. "It seems that someone is in the kitchen." She heaved a sigh of relief, then immediately ran to the door and opened it. It actually opened. This was not the little white flower's method of imprisonment. Wei Wei Bai was very experienced. Shouldn't the door be locked or two burly men standing outside? Wei Wei Bai was just about to take a step out of the door. Jiang Joshi's indifferent voice came from behind her. Do you want to know how your parents died? Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment. She finally confirmed that she had met a man who could keep his composure better than her. She retracted her foot and slammed the door shut. She gripped the doorknob tightly with both hands. She lowered her head and did not make a sound. Jiang Joshi held her walking stick and stood straight. He looked at her neck, which was hanging like a fragile reed, for a while. Then, he said, "Eat first." Wei Wei Bai unwillingly let go of the doorknob and followed Jiang Joshi to the dining table. The food was all Wei Wei Bai's favorite. But it tasted like wax to her. Jiang Joshi still maintained his usual pace. After the meal, the nanny washed the dishes and immediately left as if she was escaping the plague. Chapter 2067. From the beginning to the end, Jiang Joshi deliberately ignored Wei Wei Bai's soft gaze, which was pretending to be fierce. He slowly walked to the sofa and picked up the folder on the table. This is your parents' death report and some surveillance videos when they died. When Jiang Joshi said this, his legs couldn't support him. His face turned pale, but he didn't show any signs of pain. Wei Wei Bai couldn't wait to get the documents in his hands. However, Jiang Joshi raised his hand unhurriedly. When he stood up, she came to a point on his shoulder. If he really stretched out his hand, how could she reach it? Wei Wei Bai jumped up unwillingly, but he seemed to have a premonition and raised his hand back, not letting her touch him. The muscles on Jiang Joshi's arm were actually trembling. The pain in his leg made him feel especially uncomfortable. The doctor was afraid that he would act recklessly again, so he wrapped him with a thick bandage to prevent him from running again. Even if he was standing, he could feel the pain of his leg being squeezed like needles. However, when he saw that Wei Wei Bai couldn't reach his fingers with all her might, his eyes grew brighter and brighter. The abyss-like darkness was replaced by traces of joy. This was the first time he felt so clearly how wonderful it was to stand in front of a woman. So it wasn't that he didn't care about this. It was that he didn't dare to care. Wei Wei Bai really couldn't reach the documents that he kept waving around. She couldn't take it anymore and said, "Jiang Joshi, what exactly are you doing?" The grievance in her tone was almost like she was gritting her teeth. Jiang Joshi looked down at the top of her head, his expression still calm. "If I said that your parents' deaths had nothing to do with me, would you believe me?" Wei Wei Bai lowered her head because she had been looking up for too long. However, when she heard this, she immediately looked up, her eyes clear and sharp. "Then why did you hide the news of their deaths?" "My parents' urns, you casually placed them on the table and even threw them on the ground later." At this point, her eyes were red. "You didn't care at all. You were so cold that it made people feel that you weren't human." Jiang Joshi's eyes darkened. This was indeed a loophole. She bore a grudge against him for his behavior at that time. His coldness was one of the reasons why she was angry. Jiang Joshi silently planned it, but he didn't panic. He quietly and calmly controlled the rhythm. "At that time, I was afraid that you would be sad." Bai Weiwei's voice was a little sharp. "Now you're not afraid of making me sad." Jiang Joshi saw that the tears in her eyes had started to well up again. Why was she so crying? In the end, Jiang Joshi seemed to have accepted her fate and said softly, "Yes." He was indeed. But more than that, he was afraid that she didn't like him anymore. The adult world was a dark and cold world of killing. But his world started from the moment his leg was broken. The whole world was his enemy. His parents didn't leave him because they wanted to earn money to treat his leg. Rather, it was because they didn't want to see their hopeless son sitting in a dark room, living like a maggot. How could they not resent him? It was better to die on the spot than to become a burden to them forever, wasn't it? Human nature was really selfish. He had lived a cold life for so many years. The only person who could make him more human and soft was Wei Wei Bai. Chapter 2068. It was really too rare. He did not intend to take back such a precious feeling of liking. If she did not want it, he would not force her, but he would not let her have a good ending. It was not so easy to get a bad person's liking, or to be abandoned. Jiang Joshi hid his dark and rotten heart well. He took the document down and put it in her hand. He did not tease her anymore. Jiang Joshi said, "Their death has nothing to do with me, Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai opened the document bag and said fiercely, "If you say it has nothing to do with you, then it has nothing to do with you. Jiang Joshi, you are simply a bad person." Jiang Joshi nodded lightly. She had grown up a little. Her evaluation of him was finally a little bit correct. Wei Wei Bai looked at the information first. The information was not complicated. Jiang Joshi had deliberately made it simple, worried that she would not understand. After looking at it for a long time, Wei Wei Bai was sure that it was indeed a car accident. But she held the information and was about to say something. Jiang Joshi had already handed over his phone. "There are the numbers of all the people involved in your parents' autopsy. If you have any doubts, you can call them to verify." Wei Wei Bai's eyes trembled, as if she did not know that her intentions were so obvious. Jiang Joshi had some difficulty breathing, but he still supported his body and did not fall. "I'm not really a wolf, tiger, or leopard, and I'm not a homicidal maniac. Killing your parents has no benefits for me, Wei Wei." Actually, there was, but she did not need to know. After all, after her parents died, the pleasure of revenge was not mentioned. She was the only one left, and he could completely control her dark thoughts, her pleasure. She did not need to know. Wei Wei Bai held the information and did not take his phone in the end. Her fingers trembled as she held her parents' death report in her hand. It was indeed uncomfortable. When his parents died, a trace of disappointment flashed through his mind. She would also remember how good they were. But very soon, that soft heart disappeared in the cold and hard time. Now that he thought of his parents, he didn't have much of a reaction. This was also the reason why he wasn't too obsessed with taking revenge on the Bai couple. After Wei Wei Bai finished reading the information, she took the CD with the surveillance data and put it into the computer. The blurry image on the computer was indeed the scene of her parents crossing the road. She glared at him and clenched her fist so hard that the weak veins on the back of her hand popped out. In the end, she had to admit that Jiang Joshi was really ruthless. He didn't give her any reason to take revenge. How was she going to torture him now? He couldn't do anything about it. Wei Wei Bai sighed with emotion at the sight of so much information. Even she couldn't do better than that. This was because Jiang Joshi had cleared himself of any involvement in all the information. Moreover, the death of her cheap parents was not actually Jiang Joshi's fault. Instead, it was forcefully created by the side quests. And facing a big shot like Jiang Joshi, let alone saying that he wasn't the one who killed them. Even if he was the one who killed them, he could still pretend to be innocent. If he wasn't the one who killed them, it was even more impossible to frame him. Wei Wei Bai looked at the computer and finally turned it off. Her face was pale, and she couldn't control her hands and feet. She could barely stand. Why did they suddenly cross the road? Jiang Joshi stared at her pale face and frowned slightly. The person who checked said that they seemed to have dropped their wallet, so they turned back to get it and were hit by the car. This scene was in the video. But it was actually a distorted explanation. The correct explanation was that the person who he sent to spy on them was discovered. The Bai couple thought that it was a debt collector, so they ran to the road as if they were running for their lives. And Wei Wei Bai's father accidentally dropped his wallet, so he couldn't help but pick it up. This delay caused the two of them to be killed. At https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come over here to read the full article at https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come over here to txt download at https://www.sashu.com crossover system, Adonis, come over here to read on. Com to record this reading record. Crossover system, Adonis, come over here, comma. Chapter 2069. But Wei Wei Bai would never know this fact. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't help but look up and whisper, "Really?" Jiang Joshi paused for a moment before nodding seriously. "Really, Wei Wei?" The last glimmer of light in her eyes disappeared. So it was just an accident. Jiang Joshi also heaved a sigh of relief. It was an accident. She asked blankly, "You didn't kill him?" Jiang Joshi's mouth stiffened, but he continued to calmly bear it and said, "No." Wei Wei Bai helplessly tugged at the corners of her mouth. Tears rolled in her eyes, but she really couldn't fall. She really wanted to give the side quest a disdainful finger. Even the reason for torturing people was settled by Jiang Joshi. The side quest was simply useless. Now, it didn't even make sense to accuse Jiang Joshi of killing people to torment him. After all, with her character, it was impossible for her to know that Jiang Joshi had sent people to monitor this matter. Jiang Joshi suddenly heaved a sigh of relief and then fell back. She heard the sound of the table being touched. Wei Wei Bai turned around in shock, only to see the man who was standing upright just now curled up on the floor with a face full of sweat. Jiang Joshi. She immediately rushed over, wanting to hug him. Jiang Joshi pushed her away, the calmness on his face completely collapsing. The calmness that he had endured for so long was replaced by a mocking sneer. "Do you believe that it was an accident? But why didn't you listen to my explanation at that time and just ran away? In your eyes, am I a heinous person who kills people and sets fires?" Wei Wei Bai, yes. Of course, she couldn't say that. She just helplessly wanted to reach out and pull him, an ashamed expression on her face. Jiang Joshi saw her like this and an awkward smile appeared on his face. "Am I that bad to you? Even if you gave me a day to investigate, I wouldn't be so angry." After he finished speaking, his muscles twitched severely, and the tendons on his neck were so painful that they were exposed. Wei Wei Bai was frightened. "What's wrong with you? I'll call the doctor." Jiang Joshi pursed his pale lips tightly, a sharp mocking look in his eyes. "Why? Isn't it better for a rotten person like me, who only knows how to force you, lock you up, and not let you see your parents, to die?" Bai Wei Wei clenched her fists, barely managing to calm her chaotic breathing after a few breaths. Then, she apologized, "I was wrong, Jiang Joshi, please don't be like this." The girl's eyes were red, and the tears that had not fallen just now had already flowed down her pale cheeks. It was as if she had never encountered such a situation before. Her eyes were filled with despair and helplessness. I was wrong." Her voice was soft, but when she cried, it could hurt people's hearts. Jiang Joshi had already taken control of the situation. He wanted her to regret, be sad, and feel guilty. So he had been holding it in, pretending to be calm, waiting for this moment to torment her. But when he saw her crying so miserably, for a moment, his cold heart was throbbing with pain from her crying. It hurt more than his feet. Jiang Joshi's expression was worse than hers. He was tormenting himself with all his might, and he wasn't lying at all. So he was really upset. Wei Wei Bai didn't dare to touch him. She just covered her eyes with her sleeves. Tears fell from her fingertips to the ground. She squatted, almost curling into a ball. Her sobs were broken and tragic. I didn't do it on purpose. I'm upset, Jiang Joshi, I'm upset. Jiang Joshi pursed his lips, and his eyes started to redden. He squeezed his fingers, but finally let go. Then, he hugged her. Actually, his revenge could be even more ruthless. He would not let her go even if he trampled her into the dust and made her cry to death. Who asked her to run away? How could she kick him away just like that? He sat in the dark room for a month, his mind full of ways to make her regret. He had come up with all kinds of vicious plans. In the end, he couldn't bear to do it, so he decided on the mildest revenge method. But if he really made her regret it, he would feel bad with her. He didn't feel any sense of accomplishment from revenge at all. Jiang Joshi touched her trembling shoulders, his fingers brushing the tears on her fingers. In the end, he sighed. Don't cry. It's good that you're back. This was the first sincere words he said to her since she came back. Next time, you will see it when you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2070. The Bai couple's funeral was very simple. Very few people came. They did not do anything good when they were alive, so it was good that they were not despised after death. The Bai family's company was officially taken over by Jiang Joshi. This was the last thing the Bai family had. The funeral started and ended smoothly. After everyone left, Jiang Joshi looked at Wei Wei Bai from afar, who was squatting in front of the tombstone. He did not know what she was thinking. He did not go over. A few assistants beside him were moving things. Jiang Joshi sat under the pine tree, quietly waiting for Wei Wei Bai to come back. It was similar to how he felt when he found out that his parents had died. For a period of time, his mind was blank. But maybe it was because he was born with weak feelings, or maybe it was because he had a bad relationship with his parents. That uncomfortable feeling did not really affect his life. She might be uncomfortable for a long time. Wei Wei Bai was going through the information in her head. She felt that she could not rely on side quests, she had to rely on herself. She knew that Jiang Joshi was staring at her from behind, so she deliberately left her back for him to watch. The system said, heartbreak points have increased. Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked at the long bar. 2/10. When she came back a few days ago, Jiang Joshi took revenge on her and made her feel uncomfortable. She was sobbing like a broken dam. Heartbreak points had also increased by 1/10. And this time, it increased by 1/10 as well. Bai Weiwei's temper cooled, and she went through all the scenes that caused the heart value to swell. Then she said to the system, "Does the main system have a grudge against me?" The system was silent for a while, then said guiltily, "I don't think so. You're just a small guide. You don't even have a name in the main system." Indeed, it did not have a name. So Wei Wei Bai was an anomaly in the eyes of the main system. Although she was not found out yet. But it would automatically reject her. If one day Wei Wei Bai's strategy failed and the main system discovered her, it would immediately kill her. Wei Wei Bai nodded in understanding. This mission isn't to torture Jiang Joshi. It's to torture me. She couldn't do any actual harm to Jiang Joshi. Scolding Jiang Joshi was of no use. And every time she was upset, Jiang Joshi would feel tormented. The purpose of this thread was to torture the host. Wei Wei Bai slowly got up, and Jiang Joshi quietly stood behind her. He was still holding the crutch, but he could stand for a longer period of time. His leg was slowly improving. However, Wei Wei Bai's life seemed to have started to decline after meeting him. Jiang Joshi stared at her pale face. She had been suffering from insomnia for the past few days, and her eyes were red. Under the black high-collared clothes, her face was small and weak, losing its liveliness. But in his eyes, she was still cute. Jiang Joshi reached out and held her fingertips. They were too cold. He couldn't help but hold them tighter, wanting to warm them up. He didn't feel guilty. He was partly responsible for the death of her parents. But so what? Jiang Joshi said softly, as if he was afraid of scaring her. Let's go back, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai looked up and saw that it was him. Her eyes lit up a little. She nodded. Jiang Joshi smiled without batting an eyelid. Anyway, she would never know. When they got in the car, Wan Shan started the engine. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly out of the window, and for a moment, she didn't come back to her senses. Then she suddenly said softly, I remember when I was young, my father would always carry me to school. When we passed by small puddles, he would always say that my life was smooth sailing. Even if there were small puddles, he would carry me there. // Chapter 2071. Jiang Joshi controlled his temper. I'll carry you there in the future. Wei Wei Bai just smiled and didn't answer. My mom likes to make dresses for me. She said that she would personally choose my wedding dress in the future. Jiang Joshi's eyes darkened. It seems that your family dotes on you a lot. But he didn't continue the topic of marriage. He liked her. He liked her a lot. His heart ached for her. But marriage, his brain's rationality stopped him from making an impulsive promise. A lifetime was too long, and the speed at which one got tired of the old and the new was too fast. Could he like her for a lifetime? Wei Wei Bai looked up. Her eyes were a little gloomy, and the clear light was covered by a layer of gloominess. They're all lying to me. Jiang Joshi's fingers were holding her fingertips, and he was sweating. But he was still elegant and said slowly, they're not lying to you. Don't you have me? Wei Wei Bai just stared at him blankly for 3 seconds before she suddenly looked away. Her voice was low. But it was a little cold. That contract, can I cancel it if I want to? Jiang Joshi's fingers tightened, and her delicate eyebrows immediately furrowed in pain. He had just loosened his grip, but his voice was cold. Why are you suddenly talking about the contract? Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly. Because I don't want my parents to be humiliated. I do blame them for giving me to you. But they're dead, so I forgive them. Jiang Joshi felt his heart tighten a little. But he still didn't show too much emotion. Instead, he said lightly, the contract is not important. Wei Wei Bai plucked up her courage and looked at him directly. Jiang Joshi, I don't want to be your mistress forever. These words were too hurtful. Even someone as rational as Jiang Joshi was stunned for a moment. Her eyes lit up again, as if there was a ball of fire burning in them. My parents are dead, and I don't want the company anymore. Just take it as repayment for my debt. I know you have many ways to force me to follow the contract. Jiang Joshi looked at her, his eyes burning with life. The sophistry that was at the tip of his tongue all disappeared. A beautiful smile appeared on Wei Wei Bai's pale face. But I really don't want to have a contract between us anymore. I think. When she said this, she seemed to have noticed the presence of the driver and paused. In the end, she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his ear gently. The sweet and soft words gently fell into his ears. It also fell into his heart. I want to like you without any impurities. I want to get to know you again. I also want to let you meet the best of me again. Jiang Joshi was stunned for a long time. He felt as if something in his chest had cracked open. He suddenly recalled the first time they had met. It was different. The first time he saw her, she was on the stage. But she wasn't. It was on the night they signed the contract. So in her eyes, their meeting wasn't pure from the beginning. Jiang Joshi's pupils trembled. He felt that compared to Wei Bai's pure expectation, there was too much despicable selfishness hidden in his heart. The dark childhood and youth had set his twisted and vicious character. Even the existence of Wei Bai couldn't shake his selfish character. Wei Bai let go of him and her expression became better. She looked at him expectantly. Her round eyes were filled with his shadow. Jiang Joshi was stunned for a few seconds before his thin lips finally moved slightly. Okay. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 87. Wei Bai seemed to be relieved, although she was too tired to smile. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 2072. But her eyes were much more spirited than before. The dark uneasiness in Jiang Joshi's heart dissipated. His hand was still clasped around her 10 fingers. The contract was not important. In this world, feelings were the strongest chains. If he was sure that he could like her for a long time in the future, then he could consider marriage. The system was dumbfounded. It was holding the doll and installing eyes for the doll. Didn't you want to torture the male lead? This was the sweet male lead. Fortunately, the side quests did not cause any problems. He was always worried that Wei Bai would vomit blood. Wei Bai, yes, but the favorability is not enough. It's not fun to torture. The system's action of installing eyes paused. It thought that the host had a conscience. It was starting to take the sweet route. But after listening to the host's vicious and scary words, it felt that this was the normal style. Forget it. Vicious against vicious, selfish against selfish. That was a battle between a tortoise and a tortoise. It was the same. He continued to install eyes for the doll and installed 100 dolls. 1 day's worth of life points was worth it. After returning, Jiang Joshi searched for the contract. He looked at the contract for a while before walking out of the room with the contract. This was the first time that he had invalidated a contract that he had signed. Sometimes, he found it unbelievable that she would back down. When he walked out, he saw Wei Bai coming out of the kitchen, helping the nanny with the dishes. When she saw him, she said, "Come and eat, Joshi." After saying that, she put down the soup and blew on her scalded hand. Her face was a little red. Jiang Joshi paused in his footsteps and was lost in thought for a moment. Then, he pretended as if nothing had happened and walked over with his crutches. He put the contract on the table and saw Wei Bai busily setting the table. He could not help but knock on the table. Wei Bai looked up at him, puzzled. "Jiang Joshi, the contract is here. You can take it and crush it." This was a single copy. There was no copy. If it was gone, it was gone. Wei Bai stared blankly for a moment before a glimmer of joy slowly appeared in her eyes. Then, she picked up the contract. She was a little happy, but she couldn't say anything. Seeing that Wei Bai was like a little sparrow, Jiang Joshi calmly sat down. But in the next moment, she lowered her head and kissed his forehead. A heavy kiss on her forehead. She smiled happily and said, "Thank you." Jiang Joshi's expression softened. "Let's eat." This meal was the most heartwarming one that Jiang Joshi had ever had. Wei Bai's eyes were filled with trust and even affection. He had guessed correctly. The person whom she truly liked was truly blessed. Jung Joshi had even thought about it. In the future, when she completely fell in love with him, she would never be able to leave him. If she loved someone, she would love him to the point of disregarding everything else. Therefore, she was definitely at a disadvantage when it came to love. Even if he liked her, he was definitely the one who was loved more by her. When Jung Joshi thought of this, he felt relieved. Even if he liked someone, he wanted that person to love him more. That way, he wouldn't lose out. Wei Wei Bai returned to the dance troupe. After a few large-scale dance performances, her reputation was completely resounding. Her Weibo was also reopened, and her fans skyrocketed. Jung Joshi watched as she displayed her talent on the stage. She won the love of many people. It was impossible not to be jealous, but every time jealousy appeared, Wei Wei Bai ran down the stage and hugged him without any scruples. "This is my boyfriend." When she introduced him for the first time, Jung Joshi was slightly stunned. But he quickly reacted. "This is my first time in this position. I will do my best to do it well." The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the comma. Chapter 2073. Sure enough, he saw Wei Wei Bai with a bright smile. And a sweet kiss. He fell in love with a little girl without any scruples, without any conflicts of interest. He was the only one in her pure eyes. Because she was raised well, she had no concept of money and did not know how to spend too much. She also did not know how much wealth he had. He had never seen her covet these things. This was good. Going out was not a matter of interests, but she liked him as a person. Not other things. The favorability level was raised to 90. This favorability level was obtained when Wei Wei Bai expressed that she loved him 100%. The system looked at the mission that was not moving. It was already preparing. Recently, it had been practicing twisting its neck and dancing with the bees. Put aside the doll's eyes first. The host seemed to have forgotten about the mission. In the end, just as it twisted its neck and showed signs of cervical spondylosis, Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, "It's about time." The system's neck was crooked and could not twist back. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, "Tongzi, help me create a WeChat account and send a message to someone." The system said, "Who?" Wei Wei Bai said, "Chen Wanqi, Jung Joshi's rumored girlfriend." The system looked confused and flipped through the information. There was indeed such a person. Chen Wanqi was completely inconspicuous in the information and only took up a small space. It did not know how the host noticed it. The system said, "What message?" Wei Wei Bai was deep in thought and said after a long time, "Just say that Jung Joshi is getting married." Chen Wanqi was Jung Joshi's fanatic admirer. Jung Joshi was in his 4th year when he showed his talent. The network project that he was working on was targeted by a large American financial group. Therefore, Jung Joshi at that time was arranged by that financial group. He went on an exchange for half a year and negotiated a deal. Jung Joshi in his 4th year was like a poisonous snake that had been released from its cage, hiding in the darkness under the modeled pattern. To make himself successful, he packaged himself as a strong and sunny young man. He was not loved by everyone, but he could become the leader of a group anywhere. This was the kind of person who was born successful. Chen Wanqi happened to be in the same school and was madly infatuated with him. When she was studying in America, she spread the news of them dating like crazy. Jung Joshi knew that the Chen family was a big company in the country. He watched coldly from the sidelines and then used this scandal as an excuse. He had received a huge project collaboration opportunity from the Chen family. After the success, he calmly said that That scum was clear as day. No one could say that he was wrong. This was because it was indeed Chen Wanqi's wishful thinking. Jiang Joshi had not touched that woman at all. He didn't even say much. However, he would wait until the cooperation was successful before he would clear himself of the scandal. He was indeed selfish to the extreme. But Chen Wanqi was completely entangled with Jiang Joshi. For a period of time, she even investigated Jiang Joshi's past thoroughly. This touched Jiang Joshi's reverse scale. He was cold and calculating. Chen Wanqi's reputation was ruined. The Qin family had no choice but to lock up this willful daughter in the sanatorium. It had been a few years. Jiang Joshi definitely did not even know who Chen Wanqi was. If she had not flipped through the information, she would have been able to copy every word in the information. She would not have found the name Chen Wanqi. Wei Bai, pretend to be one of her former classmates and accidentally sent this message to the group. The system nodded. Read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Read the full article at https://sashu.com. Chapter 2074. If a paranoid person like Chen Wanqi knew that the man she liked was going to get married, and the person he was going to marry was actually Wei Bai. Her parents were the ones who caused Jiang Joshi to be crippled. It would be strange if she didn't overturn everything. Wei Bai sighed. Jiang Joshi is really difficult to win over, and he's also really hard to abuse. This man was too smart. She was exhausted. Jiang Joshi's leg was no longer in pain, and he could keep up with the recovery. Every time he recovered, Wei Bai would always follow him. She couldn't do much, but she would always hold hot water or a towel, and she often cheered him on. Jiang Joshi felt that it was very fresh. Especially when she was wearing a short skirt and doing that cute dance of encouragement. Even if he didn't know what a cute person was. For a moment, he was so cute that his heart trembled. She was really like a plant in spring. She was full of energy and could make people happy wherever she went. Jiang Joshi had always had a cold expression, but many times, he couldn't help but smile sincerely. This was a kind of carefree smile that he lacked when he was young. He thought that he would never have this kind of expression in his life. After Jiang Joshi finished the meeting, he returned to the office and saw Wei Bai lying on the sofa. He frowned and quickly brought a blanket over to cover her. Recently, she had been rehearsing a new dance play, so she was very tired. He heard that this dance play could be performed overseas. It was very important. When she talked about this dance play, her eyes lit up with hope. Jiang Joshi stroked her hair and looked at her sleeping posture. In the past, when she was vigilant, she would always curl up into a ball. Now that she had revealed her true colors, she could do whatever she wanted. She was so presumptuous. Or even, he was signing a document, but hello, she casually sat on his lap. She wrapped her arms around his neck and gave him a kiss. This kind of thing was not uncommon. It was said to be cheering for love. Jiang Joshi blushed slightly and lowered his head to kiss her lips. Yes, go for it, love. If she likes to dance, then she can continue to dance. She looks especially good when she dances. Jiang Joshi was willing to suppress the jealousy in his heart. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 92. It was difficult for the favorability points to increase, but it steadily increased. Just as Wei Bai was following Jiang Joshi around, thinking that Chen Wanqi had forgotten about Jiang Joshi. Chen Wanqi was finally here. The system could not monitor Jiang Joshi. But he could monitor Chen Wanqi. Therefore, when Wei Bai heard the system notification, Chen Wanqi rushed to find Jiang Joshi. She immediately took the nourishing soup and rushed to Jung Joshi's company. He was so happy and excited that all the opportunities he had been waiting for finally came together. How long have I been waiting? She went to Jung Joshi's company every day just for this moment. After all, it was too rare for her to suddenly go to his company and sit on his lap. After that, Jung Joshi would wonder why she was in the company. Now, there was no need to doubt. Because she went every day. Wei Wei Bai had the privilege of using the elevator, so she did not need to report. Chen Wanshi also came suddenly. Even a sly old fox like Jung Joshi would not have thought of this. The system couldn't help but remind him, stop smiling. You're going to catch adulterers, not get married. The host was going crazy from waiting for this. In Jung Joshi's office, he heard the door suddenly open. He thought it was Wei Wei Bai. Just as the smile on his face appeared, he heard an unfamiliar voice. Joshi. Jung Joshi raised her eyebrows without batting an eyelid. She looked up and looked over coldly. It was who was it? Chapter 2075. Behind her was the secretary who was waiting outside. The secretary was sweating profusely. She couldn't pull this woman away. Although Chen Wanshi didn't have an appointment, she had Director Chen's identification card, so she successfully passed the front desk. Jung Joshi tried his best to remember. He had always had a good memory. Even if it was something unimportant, he could remember it if he tried hard. Then, he smiled politely. Miss Chen. What brings you here? He forgot her name, but he remembered that the Chen family was quite wealthy. In his memory, Chen Wanshi was really too insignificant. The Chen family had some influence. When the secretary saw that Jung Joshi had allowed her to enter, she heaved a sigh of relief and retreated. Chen Wanshi immediately came in. Jung Joshi casually ordered the secretary, leave the door half open. He had a girlfriend now. He couldn't be alone with a woman in a secret room. He had to avoid suspicion. The secretary immediately left the door half open and left. Chen Wanshi couldn't wait to say, long time no see, Joshi. I can't forget you after so many years. I still love you so much. Jung Joshi was speechless. He didn't even want to laugh. Did he look like the kind of person who had the time to accept a baffling confession? Chen Wanshi saw his calm expression. She was mentally unstable to begin with, and because of the cooperation between the two families. She was pressured by her family not to look for Jung Joshi and ruin the cooperation. She had accepted her fate, but when she saw that he was going to get married, and the person he was going to marry was the person who had caused him to become disabled, she couldn't bear it anymore. Jung Joshi saw her twisted face and said indifferently, "Are you done?" "Sorry, I'm busy." "If it's not about business, you can leave first." He was still so cold, looking at her as if she was looking at a bug. Chen Wanshi trembled all over. Her eyes were red. She had been secretly in love with him for many years. He had ruined her reputation. She had spent her entire life's passion on him. But he still had no feelings for her. Jealousy surged. She suppressed her intense emotions and said coldly, "Joshi, do you know who you're marrying?" The person he was going to marry was Wei Wei Bai. As soon as she mentioned marriage partner, the person that immediately popped into his mind was her. Jung Joshi sighed helplessly. It seemed that he would really like her for life. He didn't even reject marriage. Chen Wanshi saw that he was still indifferent and finally couldn't take it anymore. "She's called Wei Wei Bai, isn't she? Her parents made you crippled and made you suffer so much. How can you marry her?" Jung Joshi frowned. This topic was a little dangerous. He glanced at the time. Fortunately, it was still early. Wei Wei Bai should still be on her way. He pressed a button on the phone. Get the security to come up and see the guest out. Cold, direct, and without a trace of humanity. Chen Wanshi was provoked by him and roared loudly, I knew you were with her. I knew it from the beginning. You were humiliating her, weren't you? I asked my brother to investigate. You took her as your mistress. Wasn't it to take revenge on her parents? You were the one who ordered people to destroy the Bai family. Jiang Joshi finally stood up with a cold face. Miss Chen, I advise you to be careful with your words. What else did Chen Wanshi have to lose? Her long-term mental support had collapsed. And didn't you kill her parents? You got people to watch them and made them afraid to cross the road and die. This was pure nonsense. There was no evidence. The surveillance could be found, but no one except Jiang Joshi knew whether or not they died because of the surveillance. This was just Chen Wanshi's guess. https://www.sashu.com/full text https://www.sashu.com download text https://www.sashu.com read on com//. Chapter 2076. But she had stepped on the truth. Jiang Joshi held her walking stick and walked out from behind the table step by step. He came to Chen Wanshi and suddenly revealed a cold smile. Miss Chen, do you still remember the feeling of lying on the same bed with more than 10 men? Chen Wanshi's pupils shrank. That was her nightmare, a lifetime nightmare. Jiang Joshi's voice was neither soft nor heavy, calm and indifferent. I don't mind letting you experience it a few more times. Chen Wanshi trembled all over. The incident of being framed rushed into her mind. She looked at the man in front of her in disbelief. It's you, Jiang Joshi's smile was even gentle. It's me. What can you do? With his current status, he could even crush her to death. Did she still think that he was the cripple who stood at the bottom of society? Chen Wanshi broke down and shouted, Jiang Joshi, I hate you. Then she covered her face and rushed out of the office in despair, disappearing down the stairs. Jiang Joshi was expressionless. His good mood was disturbed by an inexplicable crazy woman. He walked out of the door slowly with his walking stick. He planned to instruct the secretary to not tell Wei Wei Bai that a woman had been here when she came up later. But just as he walked out of the door, he stopped. His eyelids trembled and he turned around. But he saw Wei Wei Bai standing by the side with a thermos flask in her arms, looking at him blankly. The door was half open. She was standing by the door. She could hear everything. Jiang Joshi even rationally analyzed why she came early. Was it because the dance troupe's rehearsal was not tight enough? Then, a wave of panic suddenly attacked him. Wei Wei Bai's face was pale. Her fingers holding the thermos flask were shaking violently. She looked at him as if he was a stranger. Her voice was broken. Is what she said true? Jiang Joshi forced out a comforting smile, but found that he couldn't smile. Wei Wei Bai's sluggish eyes finally regained some vitality. He was even stiffer than Jiang Joshi. She seemed to be at a loss, but more than that, she was at a loss. It was as if she couldn't understand what she had just heard. She revealed an ugly smile that looked like she was about to cry. Did my parents hit your leg? Jiang Joshi didn't want her to know about this at all. Once it involved the grudges of the previous life. There was a barrier between them, and there was a heavy burden on their relationship. He wanted to go up and tell her that she wasn't. But Wei Wei Bai retreated in horror, her eyes wide open. But it wasn't the usual cuteness. It was fear. Jiang Joshi's nimble tongue actually couldn't utter a single word. Wei Wei Bai's words were blank and sharp. So you're here to take revenge on me. You ruined my family's company, you forced me to be your mistress, and you killed my parents. Jiang Joshi's mind suddenly became clear. He suppressed the huge sense of fear in his body. He immediately stumbled over and reached out to grab her arm. Wei Wei, don't listen to that woman just now. She's here to frame me. He had to comfort her first. Even if it was a lie. He couldn't let her believe it. Even if it was true, he couldn't let her know. Wei Wei Bai threw the thermos flask at him and shouted hysterically. Enough, I heard everything. You're a scumbag. Jiang Joshi's face turned pale. His usually smart brain couldn't think of anything at this moment. Wei Wei Bai pointed at his nose and scolded, that girl just now was also your fault. How could you do such a thing? What can't a person like you do? Jiang Joshi's heart was empty. He looked at her angry and hateful eyes. The hand that he stretched out trembled and lost its strength. Wei Wei Bai clenched her fists in anger. She wanted to stab him to death with every word. I was blind to like you. You're a bastard, a piece of trash. You're vicious and inhumane. You're simply a lunatic. Jiang Joshi looked at her in a daze. His brain seemed to have lost all feeling. His chest was even pressed by these words and he couldn't breathe. Wei Wei Bai's last sentence was almost vicious. Falling in love with you is my humiliation. After saying that, Wei Wei Bai turned around and rushed out. Jiang Joshi stood rooted to the ground in a daze. Every word pierced into her body. She had not felt so uncomfortable in a long time. He felt like dying. It was even more painful than the car accident back then. Jiang Joshi's walking stick suddenly fell from his hand. He immediately chased after her. Wei Wei, she definitely wouldn't come back after leaving. So he couldn't let her leave. Jiang Joshi went downstairs and looked around blankly. He saw that Wei Wei Bai had already walked out of the door. His lips were pale and his feet were starting to hurt. But he didn't care and ran after her. Rushing out of the door, he saw her waving for a taxi. Jiang Joshi limped over and reached out to grab the corner of her shirt. Wei Wei, give me a few minutes. Calm down. Give him a few minutes and he would definitely be able to cover up his lie. But Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly and flung his hand away. Get lost. Jiang Joshi's eyes hardened. He clenched his fists and was about to knock her out. But she had already turned around. He reached out to pull her. Wei Wei Bai made up her mind and pushed him hard. She couldn't stop herself and stepped back. Jiang Joshi was about to grab her when he suddenly felt a glaring light in front of him. The sudden headlights made him close his eyes. A loud crashing sound was heard. Jiang Joshi was stunned. He opened his eyes and saw that Wei Wei Bai had been hit by a car. She was lying by the road, covered in blood. Like snow, it covered his eyes. It was blank. Slash. Chapter 2077. Another car accident. Why did he say again, Wei Wei Bai was not in pain? The life support system had not come out for a long time. It was time to bring it out to save her life. In fact, Wei Wei Bai did not want to be hit by a car at first. But Jiang Joshi was too slow to catch up. She was too embarrassed to stay at the stairs and wait for him to come and pull her. Then she took the opportunity to be pushed down the stairs. Chen Wanqi's arrival was just the beginning. For a person like Jiang Joshi, if it was not for a sudden attack, he would be caught off guard. It was impossible to gain any advantage from him. But Chinwanchi's problem could still be easily solved. Her little white flower persona was too limited. She could not suddenly become Sherlock Holmes and fight with him evenly. Even if she could change her persona. Jiang Joshi did not care about personas other than the little angel. He lacked love, so much so that he would be calculative about everything. Only when he felt that she was silly and sweet enough to love him, would he give her some favorability points. So if something irreparable did not happen, something that even he could not solve. With his unscrupulous and eloquent speech, even ghosts could come to life. Her persona would not be able to torture him to death. Wei Wei Bai calmly looked at the 60% torture value. Her eyes were terrifyingly clear. Suddenly, the system's voice sounded in her ear, "Can you bear it?" The car accident came too quickly. Even if the system had warned in advance, it did not expect Wei Wei Bai to be so ruthless and retreat. When she was hit by the car, the system did not immediately react. It caused Wei Wei Bai to experience terrible pain. Wei Wei Bai smiled, "It's okay." She was used to it. The system carried a dozen painkillers in its hand. After a day, the life support system would lose its effect. It had spare money on hand. If it could make the host feel better, it would not be stingy. The system said, "Fortunately, the car braked in time. You're not badly hurt, but your leg was crushed. You probably can't dance. Wei Wei Bai, just wait for your leg to break." If he didn't break his leg, how would he have the chance to make Jiang Joshi cry for his parents? She had tolerated him for a long time. In the past, her targets were all trash. But Jiang Joshi was such a fresh and refined person. Everything was the fault of others. Only he was such a big and vicious white lotus. If she had a fly swatter, she would have swatted him onto the electric fence. A man whose favorability was over 90 was still so unlikable. He was one of a kind. Wei Wei Bai confirmed with the system, "Can I still stand up?" The system took a look at her physical condition. "It will take a long time for you to recover, but the time limit is almost up. 2 to 3 months won't be enough for you to stand up again." Wei Wei Bai nodded and closed her eyes to continue resting. Jiang Joshi didn't really listen to what the doctor said. He was looking at the results of the tests himself. He was also the one who signed the surgeries. He was very clear about the entire treatment process from beginning to end. In the end, the doctor said, "It's impossible for you to dance. If your leg bone doesn't recover well, the chances of you standing up again will only be 50%. Jiang Joshi didn't vent his anger. He was unusually calm. But his heart felt empty. It was as if after a storm, only a silent mess was left. Luan Shan and a few assistants were guarding the corridor. The caregiver was also hired. The best doctor in the field was also hired. The nanny was also prepared to take care of her for a long time. Everything was. There were no problems. After everything was arranged, Jiang Joshi slowly walked to the door of the ward with his crutches. Chapter 2078. He glanced at the white bed in the ward. Wei Wei Bai lay quietly. Her petite body was terrifyingly pale. There was a medical pad on her cheek. When she fell to the ground, her face rubbed against the ground and broke the skin. If she recuperated well in the future, it would not leave a scar. Her leg was in a cast, and her bones were badly broken. It took a few hours just to pick out the broken bones in her flesh and tendons. Behind him, Wan Shan called out to him in a low voice. Jiang Joshi regained his senses slowly. It turned out that he had been standing there for a while. After regaining his senses, he slowly walked in. He sat by the bed and quietly watched her sleep. He did not know how long it would take for her to wake up. At that time, he felt like he had been unconscious for a day and a night before he could barely open his eyes. At that time, it should have been very painful. Jiang Joshi thought about it silently, but he did not dare to think deeper. If he thought too carefully, he would empathize too much. Once he empathized, he would start to feel sad. And wallowing in sadness was what he despised the most. His life did not allow for self-pity. Without legs, he could live better than anyone else with just his brain. He was cold to others. He was even more ruthless to himself. He thought that he could continue to be so ruthless. But when he saw the cotton pad on her face, the bruise at the corner of her mouth, and her almost transparent skin, Jiang Joshi realized that his heart was surrounded by a dense pain, so suffocating that he could not breathe. Chen Wanshi was provoked by him. But retribution came to her. For the first time, Jiang Joshi knew what regret was. After keeping Wei Wei Bai for 2 days, she woke up a few times, but her eyes were empty. Jiang Joshi was prepared to explain to her what that woman said. Revenge did not exist. The contract was not to humiliate her. Threatening that woman was not true, and the death of her parents was even more ridiculous. There were many, many excuses. He knew that he could use his mouth to force them back. If her leg was not broken, he felt that he could get through this. But when Wei Wei Bai woke up, she glanced at her leg and only asked softly, "Can I still dance?" All of Jiang Joshi's excuses disappeared. A sharp pain rushed out from his back. He stared at her face that still had some hope, and his whole body was cold. No, Wei Wei. He couldn't lie to her because her leg was too serious. He had to bribe everyone to tell her she could still dance. But how could she believe it? The last light on Wei Wei Bai's face gradually disappeared. She said faintly, "Oh, you can't." These words made Jiang Joshi feel terrible. Cold sweat drenched the clothes on her back. He also realized very clearly that no matter how powerful he was, he would never be able to make her believe him. Because she lost she was because he knew because her talent, her legs, everything that shines in her life. Any comfort was more like mockery. But Jiang Joshi still opened his mouth and said, "It can be treated, Wei Wei. Don't be afraid." Wei Wei Bai did not look at him. Instead, she closed her eyes quietly. She blamed him. Jiang Joshi guarded her until she fell asleep from exhaustion again. He walked out slowly with his crutches. He could not even straighten his shoulders. When Luan Shan saw him come out, he could not help but persuade him. "President Jiang, go and rest. You've been up for 3 days." He had not eaten or slept for 3 days. If he continued like this, he would drive himself crazy. Jiang Joshi was stunned. Then, he raised his bloodshot eyes. "Have I been too heartless to many people?" Chapter 2079. Then he nodded rationally and said in a hoarse voice, "I'll go to the ward next door and lie down. Call me if Wei Wei wakes up." Jiang Joshi lay on the bed for a long time. But he still couldn't sleep. It was already late at night and the air was filled with the smell of disinfectant. Jiang Joshi got up weakly from the bed and limped to Wei Wei Bai's bed with his crutches. Luan Shan was waiting outside and was dozing off. Jiang Joshi opened the door. There was only a slight sound when the door opened, but suddenly the sound of broken sobbing could be heard. She was crying. Under the dim yellow light, her thin shadow was projected on the white wall. There was a sense of despair and loneliness. Jiang Joshi stared at her in a daze. Then he walked in. The sound of his crutches hitting the ground shocked the person on the bed. Her eyes were full of tears and there was a fragile despair in them. For a moment, Jiang Joshi didn't know what to say. This was the first time that he had done something so stupid. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were red. She blinked, but the tears couldn't be wiped clean. She forced herself to reach out and wipe her tears. Jiang Joshi was worried that she would wipe the cotton cloth on her face, so he immediately walked over and held her restless fingers. "Let me do it," he said softly, then reached out and wiped the moisture from the corners of her eyes. Wei Wei Bai looked at the gentleness on his face and then she whispered, "Jiang Joshi, I don't want to see you." How could Jiang Joshi not know? But he had been avoiding her for 3 days and didn't dare to disturb her. Now that he saw her like this, how could he bear to leave? Jiang Joshi wiped away her tears and looked at her empty eyes. He felt sad. "Wei Wei, I'll help you get through this difficult time." The pain of a broken leg. It wasn't just the pain of a physical disability. What followed was a long and insanely long psychological torture. What should have been an easy task became extremely difficult because he couldn't stand up. What should have been a normal life had all turned into pity or disdain. That kind of feeling was not something a person with a strong heart could bear. Even his nature had been twisted to the point of being incomparably vicious. How could she survive such a terrible disaster by herself? Wei Wei Bai's fair and delicate face was filled with confusion. But there was no resentment. But there was no fatality. Her eyelashes trembled and she looked away. "But I don't want you to accompany me." Jiang Joshi's expression had been gentle all this time, but when he heard this, that gentleness stiffened for a long time and did not really disappear. Her words were as sharp as knives. He was in pain for a while before he finally suppressed the bitterness at the tip of his tongue and gently coaxed her. "Wei Wei, don't listen to that woman. Do you really believe the attack of someone who has designs on me?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. She blinked in confusion and finally said with a sigh, "Jiang Joshi, I wanted to believe you at first." Jiang Joshi's dark eyes lit up. But he heard her continue. "But when you said that you caused that girl to be," she couldn't say these words, and her face turned even paler. Jiang Joshi moved his lips and smiled. "How can you really believe this? A woman was really ruined by more than 10 men. Even if she didn't die, she would be crippled. Didn't you see that woman jumping around lively? What happened back then was not something that could be explained in a few words." He wanted to deal with Chen Wanshi because her actions had already threatened his interests. TXT. Save button. Chapter 2080. The Qin family's accumulated wealth was not clean. The daughters and sons they raised were also rotten to the core. Chen Wanshi and her brother had drugged many women and forced them to shoot those kinds of movies for fun. Wasn't that a lot? If it wasn't for that crazy woman drugging him, he couldn't be bothered with her. After all, the Qin family had a foundation. Jiang Joshi was very rational. There was still cooperation between them. Giving her face and laughing it off was the mature way to do it. Chen Wanshi herself couldn't understand. He didn't feel that there was anything wrong with letting her suffer. But he didn't know how to say these words. Because the mud below was too disgusting. He had climbed all the way and was used to the darkness. Even he felt dirty. Why did he break these for her to hear? He couldn't protect her. It wasn't enough to cripple her. Did he want to pollute her heart? Jiang Joshi could be so ruthless to others. He could also push himself to the limit. He couldn't bear to part with her. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 95. The sadism value also rose to 80%. Wei Wei Bai heard his words and only frowned, but the trust in her eyes was completely shattered. In the end, she finally mustered up her courage. "Did my parents hit your leg?" Jiang Joshi really wanted to say no. Lying was a common thing for him anyway. What could she do if he didn't admit it? But Wei Wei Bai's clear and lifeless eyes stared at him motionlessly. Jiang Joshi's breath stopped. It was as if there was a foreign object in his throat. He kept lying to her. Even his love for a person was so impure. There was no trace of sincerity. Wei Wei Bai stared at him for a long time and finally laughed at herself. So it's true. Jiang Joshi didn't even have a chance to refute. Wei Wei Bai's voice was cold and light. I was still thinking about why I was chosen by you. Just as my family's company was in trouble, you appeared at the same time. It's not a series, how can everything be a coincidence? It was indeed a coincidence. Because it was all planned out. There was no such thing as a series of just right in this world. Some were just conspiracies. Jiang Joshi looked like he was being judged. His usual quick-wittedness was nowhere to be seen. However, he sat up straight and couldn't bear to say a single word of quibble. It wasn't that he couldn't say it. Lying was as normal for him as drinking water. He would speak the human language when he saw the ghost. Once they became rich, they would start to look down on others and would be too lazy to even smile at them. They were truly vile characters who had gained power overnight. If there really was a novel or a TV series, his personality would be that of a vicious villain. He would never be able to get close to a decent protagonist. But when it came to her, he started to want to be serious and didn't want to lie to her every word. Wei Wei Bai's lips were a little pale. So you came looking for me to take revenge on me. It's also true that you wanted to humiliate me. Jiang Joshi finally managed to squeeze out a smile. Have you ever seen a humiliated mistress living as freely as you? Wei Wei Bai, don't erase my good intentions with just one sentence. Wei Wei Bai didn't listen and continued to press on. My parents' death was also because of you. Jiang Joshi finally raised his voice. Wei Wei Bai, if I wanted to kill your parents, I wouldn't have waited until now, and I definitely wouldn't use such a stupid method. Wei Wei Bai was stunned and flinched at his shout. Jiang Joshi immediately shut up. He knew that his anger had scared her. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a long time before her voice softened. You can go out. I want to be alone for a while. / save button. Chapter 2081. Jiang Joshi knew that this was a good start. She was innocent, but not stupid. Even if he didn't kill the Bai couple. But he was abroad, and he couldn't get rid of the blame for the accident. He didn't lie to her, so she guessed that he was behind her company's bankruptcy. Jiang Joshi got up slowly and looked at her deeply for a while. Good night, call me if you need anything. Wei Wei Bai just said coldly. Get lost. She didn't want to see him, so he immediately got lost. Jiang Joshi felt that he had ruined his retribution for so many years. So the girl he liked was hurt by him. He swallowed this bitter fruit painfully. His throat was bleeding, and his heart was crushed into pieces. But he couldn't fall. Wei Wei Bai's most difficult part was not over yet. She hadn't gotten used to the pain of not being able to walk. He had to be her support. Jiang Joshi struggled to get out of the door. When he saw that Luan Shan was awake, his expression wasn't much better. Luan Shan was an assistant that he had brought up single-handedly. They had a tacit understanding of each other for many years. The two of them didn't need to speak for a while to feel the desperate atmosphere. Jiang Joshi was silent for a while. Look after Wei Wei. I'm going to rest. I'll resume rehabilitation tomorrow. The rehabilitation for the past few days had all fallen behind. He couldn't fall. Luan Shan immediately nodded seriously, but he still couldn't help but persuade him, it's better to stop for a while first. Don't force yourself to the point where you don't have time to rest. Jiang Joshi shook his head calmly. His voice was light but firm. I have to recover the ability to walk quickly, otherwise. He paused for a while, but still said it. Who's going to carry her? Her leg was very likely to not be able to stand up. She stayed in the hospital for more than a week. After confirming that there were no sequelae from the surgery, she was discharged. A broken leg required a long time to recover, so as long as she was careful at home, it would be much better than in the hospital. Wei Wei Bai refused to talk to Jiang Joshi. Jiang Joshi didn't care and kept talking to himself. For example, whether the food tasted good, whether the wound still hurt, and so on. A grown man was walking around her with a walking stick every day. Even the nurses felt that Jiang Joshi was simply a peerless good man. They looked at Wei Wei Bai with envy. However, Wei Wei Bai remained calm. He thought about how she had been circling around him all this while. Now, she really wanted to kick him away, but Jiang Joshi surrounded her. Every dog has its day. Men, hee hee. The nurse put Wei Wei Bai in a wheelchair and pushed her out of the hospital. Wei Wei Bai frowned. She looked at Jiang Joshi and suddenly said, I don't want to go back with you, Jiang Joshi. Jiang Joshi was very patient. Let your leg heal first, then we'll consider moving. If it was when she was fine. No matter how hard she tried, he would be patient and have the ability to accompany her. Even if she really hated him, so much so that she ran abroad. Could it be that he didn't have the money to chase after her? But now, he couldn't. Her leg was broken, and the cast had not been removed. If he continued to torment her, she would be the one suffering in the future. Wei Wei Bai was brought back. Now, she really couldn't run away even if she wanted to. The furnishings in the house had been changed. Everything was mainly for the convenience of pushing a wheelchair. The nanny also brought 2 little nannies, knowing that the house needed more care. After all the arrangements, it was already night. Wei Wei Bai had a cold expression on her face. Her eyes were lowered, and her thick eyelashes were like butterfly wings, casting a gloomy shadow under her eyelids. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. there. Chapter 2082. When she looked at him angrily, even resentfully. Her brows were furrowed, and her pink lips were pursed tightly. Her face was pale, but it made people feel weak and obedient. Jiang Joshi did not know that when she hated someone, she could actually hate so softly. Why was she so easy to hurt? Back then, he was like her, sitting in a wheelchair and looking at others coldly. He was so scared that he would cry. Unlike her, who was so soft and powerless. She really couldn't hate someone well. Jiang Joshi walked over and couldn't help but reach out to touch her hair. Actually, he wanted to pinch her angry face. But he couldn't bear to do it. Wei Wei Bai glared at him fiercely and slapped his hand away. I don't want to be here. Are you deaf? Jiang Joshi saw that she was finally angry and her face was full of vitality. He finally heaved a sigh of relief. He was afraid that she wouldn't say anything and would hold it in. What if something went wrong in the end? Jiang Joshi asked patiently, then where are you going? Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of confusion, but she still stubbornly raised her head with a cold and determined gaze. I want to leave you. Jiang Joshi was silent for a while before saying, how are you going to leave me? Wei Wei Bai paused for a moment, stumped by this question. Jiang Joshi asked kindly, do you want me to book a car or a hotel for you? Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Her lips trembled before she said, it's none of your business. Jiang Joshi whispered gently, but I can't do it. How could he not care about her? Her request was too difficult. Wei Wei Bai couldn't bear with the stubborn Jiang Joshi. Jiang Joshi, what else do you want? You brought me back without my wishes. It's illegal to detain me. Jiang Joshi nodded. I know. So what? I think that's what they always do on TV. He recalled for a moment and suddenly leaned over. His warm breath touched her cheek and dyed her pale complexion a little red. Right now, you can't even call for help. Even if you scream until your throat breaks, no one will hear you. Wei Wei Bai, why couldn't he just let her go? Jiang Joshi was only joking. It was just that his expression was cold and not very funny. Wei Wei Bai was so angry that she wanted to raise her hand. She would vomit blood, so she couldn't hit her. What a scam. Jiang Joshi seemed to know what she was going to do, but he didn't avoid it. He even stuck his face close to hers, waiting for her to vent her anger. Now was the time when she was the most confused and uncomfortable. If he didn't vent his anger, he might not be able to think straight in the future. From the moment he knew that she couldn't stand up, he had been thinking about it for more than 10 hours. He finally confirmed that he couldn't let go of her and liked her. If he could like her for a lifetime, it should be love. He calmly accepted that he had fallen in love with a girl. Then, he mentally prepared himself to be good to her and give her everything that she wanted. No matter how she hit or scolded him, no matter how she vented, he couldn't show any negative emotions. He wanted to be her man. So, he had to think of ways to get through all these difficulties. But after waiting for a long time, Jiang Joshi still couldn't get her hand. He didn't expect that at this stage, she would still be so silly. Wei Wei Bai retracted her hand and looked at him with reddened eyes. Jiang Joshi, we're even now. Jiang Joshi seemed to know what she was going to say. He retorted lightly, we're not even now. How could there be such a thing between them? And read the at https://www.sashu.com/ and read at https://www.sashu.com and read at https://www.sashu.com and read at https://m.sashu.com. Chapter 2083. Wei Wei Bai clenched her fists and tried to suppress her impatience. Her expression turned cold. If it was really my parents who caused your legs to be disabled back then, I'll admit that you're here for revenge. I also believe you that my parents weren't killed by them. The calmer she was, the less gentle Jiang Joshi's expression became. Wei Wei Bai pointed at her legs. I admit that you're good to me, so let's not talk about the contract shaming or anything. Just treat it as a failed relationship. I'll return these legs to you, and we won't owe each other anything in the future. Jiang Joshi really wished that she had hit him. He wouldn't have said such hurtful words. He endured the tearing pain in his chest and softened his voice. Wei Wei, what happened back then was different from what happened now. At that time, after your parents hit me, they panicked and reversed the car to escape. In the end, I didn't have to be disabled, but I could only sit in a wheelchair after being run over. So, he wasn't wrong to say that they were scum. Back then, even if those two people had the slightest intention of getting out of the car to check on him, he would still be injured. He was only injured to the extent of a bone fracture, not to the extent of being disabled for so many years. Wei Wei Bai's face was pitifully pale. A trace of confusion flashed in her eyes, but more than that, there was despair. They aren't that kind of person. Jiang Joshi wanted to sneer and say even more cruel words to her. For example, how his parents knelt down and begged them to save his legs as soon as possible, even if they only paid for the surgery. But everything was in vain. He had seen with his own eyes how her parents had left impatiently without feeling guilty at all. So, when he found out that they died in a car accident, he really wasn't sad at all. What good could a person without compassion and conscience do? Doing business was all about squeezing the blood and sweat of others. The only good thing they did was to raise their daughter so well. But young Joshi didn't continue saying these words. Because even if he told the truth, it would only hurt her. Therefore, young Joshi changed his tone and said gently, "All right, let's not talk about that. Even if we don't owe each other anything, I won't let you go." He used the most gentle voice to say the most domineering words. Wei Wei Bai was really at a loss. She didn't know what to do. In the end, she finally couldn't take it anymore. She suddenly put her arm around his neck and forced him to lower his head. Jiang Joshi was stunned. Her teeth had already bitten his shoulder. It was as if it was being gnawed by a small beast. It was filled with desperation. Jiang Joshi knew what she was thinking. Her current messy life was all because of him. Her company went bankrupt and her parents died. She had completely lost the leg that she was most proud of. She could neither dance nor walk. To be able to say that they were even, she was already considered a saint. Therefore, he did not move and allowed her to vent her anger. He heard her muffled voice filled with grief. "You're bad. You're a big bad guy." Jiang Joshi's hand slowly stroked her hair. He moved his shoulder closer and there wasn't even a trace of pain on his face. He softly replied, "Congratulations. You've finally seen my true colors." Of course he was bad. He was very bad. He was so bad that he had pus flowing out of his feet. But it wouldn't be in the future. He would be good to her for the rest of her life. Wei Wei Bai bit even harder. The smell of blood spread. Jiang Joshi was also in so much pain that his muscles were tense. However, he only pursed his lips and didn't move back. Even to the extent that his voice was gentle and calm. "Wei Wei, if your teeth are sore, relax a bit before biting. Don't break your teeth." Even Jiang Joshi didn't believe it. It turned out that when he started to know how to love a girl, it was so painful that it penetrated his bones and made him bleed. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 96. For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button. Chapter 2084. Wei Wei Bai endured for a while and finally let go of her teeth. Her mouth was full of blood. Jiang Joshi did not have any abnormalities. Blood seeped out of the wound on his neck and soaked his collar. The nanny was so scared that she immediately went to get the first aid kit. Jiang Joshi calmly wiped her mouth, not caring at all about her madness. Jiang Joshi went to treat the wound. The system asked strangely, "Is there no punishment?" She could not touch him, but she could use her mouth. Wei Wei Bai calmly wiped the corner of her mouth. There was still the smell of blood on it. "I was punished. I also vomited blood. Then I swallowed it back." Of course, some of the blood was not swallowed in time and still spat on Jiang Joshi's neck. She had to bite deeper, or else there was no way to explain where the blood came from. The system silently gave a thumbs up. The host was ruthless. Jiang Joshi coaxed Wei Wei Bai to eat. She ate spoon by spoon at a very slow speed. It was obvious that she was eating in pain. The bruise on the corner of her mouth had faded, and the wound on her face did not need to be covered with a cotton cloth. The faint red marks on her pale face made people feel hopeless and weak. Jiang Joshi did not like her pitiful appearance. But he also felt that it was understandable. After all, other people would feel terrible when they had a small illness. She did not have a leg. It was good enough that she did not go crazy. It was not like Jiang Joshi had not experienced the process of wanting to go crazy but suppressing it into a morbid state. After eating, Jiang Joshi carefully counted the medicine for Wei Wei Bai. A pile of pills that looked disgusting. Wei Wei Bai looked at the medicine listlessly. She did not need Jiang Joshi to say anything. She took the water that she had poured and swallowed it one drop at a time. She was like a little hamster, eating one pill at a time. She did not know that the medicine had to be swallowed to not torture people. After taking the medicine, Wei Wei Bai felt a bitter taste on the tip of her tongue. Jiang Joshi suddenly reached out, lifted her chin, and gently stuffed a piece of candy into her mouth. The sweetness immediately spread on the tip of her tongue. A hint of surprise flashed across Wei Wei Bai's face. Jiang Joshi immediately released her and smiled. "What movie do you like? I'll play it for you." Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. White-haired girl. Jiang Joshi, the story of a bully kidnapping a girl. He touched the tip of his nose in amusement. Did he look like a landlord who was oppressing her? Jiang Joshi had no choice but to look for resources. After all, it was a very old film, and the images were all in black and white. Jiang Joshi connected the TV to the computer and turned on the movie. As expected, the quality of the picture was not very good. Wei Wei Bai didn't look down on them either. Instead, she looked at them calmly. Jiang Joshi's leg had recovered quite well. He secretly put his crutches aside, got up, and walked to the kitchen. It was obvious that his leg was still twisted, but it was much better than before when he couldn't stand up at all. He picked up the fruit that the nanny had cut and slowly walked to the sofa. Putting the fruit on the table, he picked up a piece of apple and said with a smile, "Wei Wei, eat the fruit. I'll feed you." Wei Wei Bai looked at him as if she had seen a ghost. When Jiang Joshi saw the shock in her eyes, she knew that her cold and aloof persona had collapsed. Thinking back to the past, he was like a landlord bully on TV, sneering and asking her to feed him. Those images were sweet to think about, but it was a sin to think about it too deeply. Thinking back to the first time he met her, she was like a cute little swan wearing a diamond crown, sparkling on the stage. Now, she was exhausted and sitting alone in a wheelchair. The last trace of life in her eyes was gone because of him. Chapter 2085. If there really was retribution in this world, his retribution had fallen on her. What was even more frightening was that this was right. Because her pain would be multiplied tenfold, 100-fold, on his head. Why didn't he think of running away before? Running away before falling in love with her. It wouldn't have ended up in a situation where both sides suffered. Jiang Joshi suppressed his unnecessary self-pity and maintained the same posture. In the end, his hands were sore. Wei Wei Bai's mouth was tight, her round eyes were straightened, and her face was indescribably cold. She was in a cold war with him. Jiang Joshi could only give up in the end and throw the fruit into his mouth. Bitter. He forced a smile. It was also bitter. Actually, her current attitude was already very good. Even if she went crazy, she would still bite him. He was prepared to be stabbed by her with a knife. The system watched the story of the white-haired girl on TV with great interest. However, the host was suppressing her unhappiness. The system felt that the host's leg was broken. Although it didn't hurt after using painkillers, it was definitely unhappy. So it comforted her, the time for the strategy is almost up. We can go back, don't worry about your leg. The torture points were at 90%. After another round of torture, Jiang Joshi would be at 10%. And the favorability points would be left with a few points. The host's business ability was strong, so the strategy would definitely be completed in these 2 months. Wei Wei Bai, it's not the leg. 10 Best Warming System of the Year, then where does your body hurt? Wei Wei Bai's face darkened. Remember to remind me not to drink milk later. System, ? Was she worried that Jiang Joshi would poison her? Wei Wei Bai, my leg is broken. If I want to go to the toilet that night, it's too difficult for my hand to crawl. When she was dancing, most of her strength was trained on her leg. Actually, it wasn't that she couldn't walk upside down, but the cast on her leg was too heavy. She was worried that the cast on her leg would hit her face. She told the system about her worries. The system remained silent for a long time before finally squeezing out a sentence. You should ask the male lead to carry you. Halfway through his speech, everyone fell silent. Your leg is broken, so is mine. No one was able to take advantage of the other. It was truly a miserable situation of being evenly matched. Wei Wei Bai had trouble going to the toilet. She was so depressed that she finally fell asleep under the hypnosis of the black and white film. Jiang Joshi had been paying attention to her. She leaned against the sofa with her head tilted. Her petite body sank into the soft backrest, and her braided hair fell to the side of her arms. His pale face had a faint unhealthy grayish-green hue to it. Jiang Joshi was afraid that she would catch a cold if she slept like this. He got up and came to her side. She called softly, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai didn't respond. Her tightly pursed lips and furrowed brows relaxed a lot. Her soft face still looked fragile, but she was not as nervous as when she was awake. Jiang Joshi felt like he was torturing her like an eagle. Of course, he knew that she didn't want to see him. Seeing him reminded her of her broken leg. He was practically the culprit who caused her to be hit by a car. She wanted to see how he would react. Even the kindest person couldn't forgive in an instant. Jiang Joshi was silent for a while before he quietly lowered his head and kissed the wound at the corner of her mouth that had already healed. He also kissed the red scar on her cheek that was starting to heal. Then, he gathered his strength and reached across her knees and under her armpits. He wanted to hug her. This hug really used up all of his strength. Chapter 2086. Jiang Joshi didn't even frown when he felt a familiar pain in his leg. He held his breath as he slowly limped towards her and held her in his arms. The nanny came out of the kitchen after cleaning up and saw Jiang Joshi carrying Wei Wei Bai as he walked towards the room at a tortoise's pace with great difficulty. She opened her mouth. Jiang Joshi shook his head and finally let him enter the room successfully. This position was very embarrassing for this man, and his limp was even more obvious. But he seemed to be unaware of it. Tormenting himself like this was a little painful, but at least it could divert his attention. It wasn't so uncomfortable. He put her on the bed and adjusted a comfortable position for her. Then he got on the bed and reached out to carefully hold her in his arms, trying his best to make her feel less uncomfortable. The lights were on. Jiang Joshi looked at her face for a long time. The more he looked, the more he liked her. In the end, he couldn't help but kiss her face many times. Then he smelled her familiar scent and slowly closed his eyes to sleep. In the middle of the night, he heard a faint sound. Jiang Joshi suddenly opened his eyes. The fatigue in his eyes was replaced by sober vigilance. The person in his arms was frowning and muttering something. Jiang Joshi knew that she was having a nightmare, so he didn't dare to disturb her. Instead, he gently reached out and patted her back. Wei Wei Bai's tightly furrowed brows finally relaxed. Then she said softly, thirsty. Jiang Joshi then remembered that she used to like to drink something before sleeping. Sometimes it was milk, sometimes it was water, or fruit juice. Jiang Joshi immediately got up. There was a thermos on the table, and he poured a cup of warm ginseng tea. Then he came to the bedside and found that she had fallen asleep again. Listening to her quiet and even breathing, Jiang Joshi thought for a moment and took a big sip of the ginseng tea in his hand. Then he reached across her neck and carefully held her face. He lowered his head and kissed her dry lips gently. Even though Wei Wei Bai was asleep, she still instinctively swallowed. He was especially careful and slow, so by the time he finished feeding her, she was lying softly in his arms. She had no idea what he was doing. Jiang Joshi's movements were very slow. After he stuffed her back into the blanket, he realized that his back was already covered in a thin layer of sweat. He couldn't help but sigh in relief. It was the most dangerous, most embarrassing, and most nervous time when he was creating the project. There was no need to go that far. His love for her was a mixture of all kinds of feelings. The most obvious emotion in it was pity. Now that she was like this, she couldn't leave him. She would probably die if she left him. Jiang Joshi looked at her soft face. As a man, he was almost beaten down by his disability. How could she get through this crisis alone? She was right to be angry, but it was stupid to push him away. What she should do now was to hug his golden thigh and live a good life. In the end, she refused to hug him. He could only sigh and force her to hug him. Although the car accident was an accident, how could people be so open-minded? So when she looked at him coldly, Jiang Joshi could still deal with these negative emotions calmly. Jiang Joshi thought about it for a long time and his mood improved a lot. He had always been rational. After being sad for a while, he would not continue to immerse himself in sadness. Instead of being in a bad mood and feeling sad when he looked at her, it was better to think of something good and help her solve all her problems. That was the right thing to do. So when Wei Wei Bai woke up the next day because of the urge to go to the toilet, she saw that her sadomasochism points had decreased. And her favorability had increased to 97. Chapter 2087. Wait a minute, why would this thing regress? Wasn't this a scam? She stared at Jiang Joshi's face and finally calmed down. For a man like Jiang Joshi, once he regained his rationality, he would be able to think through everything. No sadness would bother him for long. His favorable impression of her had rushed up to more than 90 points. He was just short of a life and death commitment. He could still suppress his emotions with rationality and continue to deal with everything calmly. At the same time, his favorable impression of her would increase as well. If it wasn't for the fact that her emotions were blocked, Wei Wei Bai would have held his hand and said, "Brother, we can definitely be friends." Such a cold temperament and a brain that was about to explode from rationality. He was someone who could do great things. Wei Wei Bai estimated that even if she broke her own hand, she wouldn't be able to torture him anymore. It was really difficult to get favorable impression of her. It was even more difficult to torture him. She was already in such a state, yet he was still so calm. Wei Wei Bai sighed. She had met her match. The system also stared at him for a long time and retreated a little. But the host was already in such a state, yet the favorable impression of her was still so high. Jiang Joshi could still adjust his mood. He first increased the favorable impression of her and then decreased it. As expected, she still had to continue practicing the neck-twisting dance. The host and the system were both in a bad mood at the same time. Because they both thought of a problem. Her legs were already broken. What should she do when the side punishment came? Doing a handstand and twisting her neck like a bee dancing, Jiang Joshi finished some work and came out of the study. He saw Wei Wei Bai, who was drinking medicine. She was staring at the wall in a daze. Her face was blank and her eyes were lifeless. He stood there for a while before his expression relaxed. He then revealed a gentle smile and walked over. Wei Wei Bai held the bowl. Her mind was filled with the tragic scene of the handstand dance. It was too tragic. She wanted to die on the spot. Finish drinking. Jiang Joshi took her bowl away and stuffed a candy from her pocket into her mouth. His pockets were filled with snacks to coax little girls. Sweetness was the most popular taste among girls. Wei Wei Bai subconsciously took a sip of the candy. It tasted sweet. She looked at him expressionlessly. But she didn't reject his candy. Jiang Joshi knew that this was a good sign. He knew that she wouldn't hate him for long. Revenge was definitely not the most important thing in her life for someone who didn't forget to volunteer at the nursing home even when she was running away. Jiang Joshi took some books. What do you like to read? I'll read it to you, okay? Wei Wei Bai looked up at him. Her eyes were cold, but they contained complicated emotions. Finally, she said, 2 or 3 things about the blackening of the school hunk and the tyrannical underachiever. Jiang Joshi said calmly, I'll look for it for you. Even though the name made it seem like a third-rate novel. But he didn't expect the writing to be so bad. Most importantly, it was written in the language of men and men. Even though Jiang Joshi had been through a lot, he had never seen something like this before. Wei Wei Bai said, read it. Jiang Joshi smiled bitterly. He really knew how to torment people. Then, he coughed softly and couldn't help but lower his voice. That guy pinned him against the wall of the rooftop. He gave him a devilish smile. Man, you're mine, you know. Jiang Joshi couldn't help but facepalm. What the hell was this? Bai Weiwei's face also reddened, but seeing him in such a sorry state, she couldn't help but pull up the corners of her mouth and hold back a smile. Jiang Joshi observed carefully and noticed that she had softened in that instant. That bit of awkwardness was completely gone. He continued to read. He tied his hands together and picked up the candle. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. And TXT download at https://www.sashu.com. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read it on your phone. https://m.sashu.com//. Chapter 2088. Wei Wei Bai's eyes widened. She did not expect the scale to be so big. Jiang Joshi's cold face did not have a trace of awkwardness. Even his voice was slightly magnetic, with a contrasting sense of asceticism. The leather whip hits the beautiful back, like a red flower blooming in the snow, so beautiful that it makes people tremble. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, stop reading. Jiang Joshi looked up and saw the rare color on her cheeks. He did not continue reading, but searched. What else do you want to hear? I'll find it for you. Oh, the overbearing CEO's late-night date with the male secretary, the beast doctor's special examination with the beautiful male patient. Damn, he had seen thick-skinned people. He had never seen someone so thick-skinned. Wei Wei Bai held her forehead. She had goosebumps as she listened. Jiang Joshi could actually use his beautiful, decent lips to read such a shameless book. This could not defeat him. Wei Wei Bai felt that even if he became the main character in the book, he would still be able to solve all the problems with a calm face. It was impossible to make him sad for a long time. He was stubborn, unmoved by force or persuasion. In the beginning, Wei Wei Bai was still confident in this side quest. She was not invincible when it came to torturing people. But she still had experience. In the end, she encountered the biggest iron plate in history. He did not fall for it. He could handle self-harm. He even found the resources to read a little pornographic novel. Jiang Joshi's eyes were actually burned, but if it could make Wei Wei Bai a little angry, he would not be able to read it. He could go to a good person and ask for a peaceful life. Jiang Joshi smiled. I'm in a bad mood. Don't look at this. You don't like it. If you want to vent, do it to me. As long as you don't hurt yourself, you can hit me. The 24 filial piety was really touching. The system who was gluing Dolly's eyes said, why don't you try doing a handstand to practice your dance? When the host is about to break up with the other targets, the host is about to break up with the host. It was estimated that the torture points would be filled to the brim. In the end, he encountered that old fox, Jiang Joshi. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't kill him. The host was probably in despair. Wei Wei Bai was indeed desperate. Don't talk to me. My hand hurts now. Just imagining a face-to-face dance, not only did his hands hurt, but his neck also hurt. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai was depressed again, Jiang Joshi held her hand. Don't hold it in when you're in a bad mood. You can torture me if you're angry. It was Wei Wei Bai's first time seeing a target so eager to be abused. If she really whipped him, he would probably agree. Jiang Joshi knew that she could not let go. She did not know how to torture people. She would only torture herself. Therefore, he walked over and took out a large stack of documents. These are all enterprise project documents for the second half of the year. Tear them up. After saying that, he even demonstrated and tore a document into pieces. If I tear up a document, it will cost me more money and energy to redo it. It's especially torturous. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Jiang Joshi saw that she was still unhappy, so he went to get a laptop. Come, smash it. There are a lot of secrets in there. If you smash it, it will take me more than half a year to reorganize it. Wei Wei Bai's expression gradually became desperate. Jiang Joshi racked his brains. Do you like to whip people? I'll whip them for you. Wei Wei Bai, I'm kneeling to Big Boss Jiang. This man's heart must be made of diamond. He was like a titanium alloy cockroach that couldn't be beaten to death. Wei Wei Bai sized him up and saw that he was exuding a masochistic aura. Slash. Chapter 2089. The more he tortured her, the happier he felt. She weakly reached out to cover her face and finally said, "Dance for me." "I really can't torture you, you little bastard." Jiang Joshi frowned. He didn't know how to dance. Wei Wei Bai also didn't expect to torture him with dancing. He was so thick-skinned. So she said coldly, "If you don't know, then go away." Jiang Joshi immediately pulled his clothes. "What kind of dance do you like? Ballet or modern dance?" Bai Weiwei was almost startled by the bold and unrestrained posture. "If you want to dance, dance. Why are you taking off your clothes?" Weiwei Bai sulked for a long time and deliberately wanted to embarrass him. "Kelp dance." Jiang Joshi searched for kelp dance. He was speechless. This feeling was as low as square dancing. It was a little hard to explain. However, it was rare for Wei Wei Bai to ask for anything. Jiang Joshi didn't stand on ceremony and stood up. His legs were a little limp. Then he looked at the video on his phone and tried to reach out and shake it. Like this. Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai's expression had gone from despair to hopelessness. How to torture this kind of man? Her ability to get high was top-notch. Jiang Joshi twisted his waist with difficulty. His handsome face was still serious. Is the posture correct? Wei Wei Bai refused to talk to him. She slowly pushed the wheelchair, wanting to get away from this big pig trotter who couldn't be tortured to death. Jiang Joshi reached out and trapped her wheelchair. He chuckled softly. "Don't you like it? How about the three little bears dance for you to see?" Wei Wei Bai reached out and slapped his shameless face. "Go away." Jiang Joshi let go of her as she wished and let her escape. The teasing smile on his face slowly disappeared. He looked at her calmly and with some relief. If only she could be happier. Not to mention a kelp dance, even a striptease would be fine. The system, however, was desperately trying to save its host. Wake up, isn't it just a wasp dance? It doesn't matter if I can't abuse the male lead. Wei Bai said, I've never seen such a thick-skinned person. The system asked, don't you look in the mirror every day? Wei Bai, the system replied, don't worry. There's no such thing as failure in life. Stand up after failure. Wei Bai said, my leg is broken. Oh, that's right. I can't stand up. Wei Bai knew that Jiang Joshi was fully prepared. Right now, she was making a big fuss and turning the world upside down. He could also handle everything calmly. It was as difficult as ascending to the heavens for a big shot who had risen from the bottom to the top to crush his heart. She had already used up all her tricks, but Jiang Joshi still had a bunch of tricks waiting for her. Jiang Joshi tore up a pile of original documents, and Luan Shan came knocking on his door. It was very troublesome to remake this thing. However, Director Jiang was calm. Wei likes it. Luan Shan was speechless. In the end, he said, is Miss Bai feeling better? Her leg was broken, and it was a dance. Wasn't that equivalent to losing a life? Jiang Joshi thought for a while and smiled. She's much more energetic recently. During the half a month when her leg was broken, her mental state was extremely bad. Even Jiang Joshi's heart skipped a beat. During this time, he spared no effort to coax her. She finally started to get impatient, and there was a hint of anger in her eyes. If Luan Shan knew about Jiang Joshi's so-called energy, it would be Wei Bai's disdainful gaze. She would definitely doubt her life. Luan Shan thought for a while and took out 2 tickets. These are tickets to Miss Bai's dance troupe's dance show. The last show will be held tonight. Chapter 2090. Jiang Joshi was silent. He hesitated for a while, but he still took the 2 light but heavy tickets. He knew what Luan Shan meant. Wei Bai didn't dare to go out now. She had been avoiding the dance troupe. She didn't even dare to watch her favorite dance show. This wasn't a good sign. If she didn't untie the knot in her heart, she would never get better. When Jiang Joshi finished eating at night, he suddenly said, Wei, let's go out and play. Wei Bai's expression changed. She dropped the chopsticks in her hand and said with a trembling voice, I don't want to go out. Jiang Joshi didn't listen to her. Instead, he pushed her wheelchair and walked out. It's just a walk, he said calmly. But when they arrived at that familiar place, Wei Bai's face was already pale and desperate. I want to go back, Jiang Joshi. The lights on the stage were already turned on. The audience was very lively. But Wei Bai seemed to have come to a terrible hell. She looked at Jiang Joshi with a pleading look. Jiang Joshi's eyes flashed with suppressed sadness. He reached out and hugged her, pressing her face into his chest. It's okay, I'll be with you. He forced her to return to reality instead of avoiding staying at home all the time. She would fall sick. He didn't want her to never see the sun and feel that there were better things in this world. The dance show was very successful. Without Wei Bai, there were a lot of highlights. But it was still gorgeous and beautiful. The audience applauded thunderously at the end, but Wei Bai was expressionless. Jiang Joshi pushed her and limped out of the performance venue. She sat in the wheelchair. The little bit of vitality she had with difficulty was replaced by a defeated aura. Under the cold moonlight, the shadows of the 2 of them seemed very lonely. He suddenly said, Wei Wei, can I carry you? Wei Wei Bai forced a smile. Jiang Joshi, is it that fun? Do you like to laugh at me that much? Jiang Joshi didn't seem to hear the sharpness in her voice. Instead, he slowly walked in front of her and calmly looked at the embarrassment in her eyes. He continued, repeating in a low voice. I'll carry you. Wei Wei Bai exploded. She clasped his arm with both hands. You know how much pain I'm in. Why did you let me see this? The sympathetic, mocking, and regretful gazes of others. There was also the stage play that was successful despite losing her. It was as if she was being hanged on the spot. Jiang Joshi knew what was going on, but he turned around and said, Come, I'll carry you. Wei Wei Bai said, You're crippled. You can't carry me. Jiang Joshi was silent for a moment before saying indifferently, I pay attention to my image because I climbed up from the bottom. In the eyes of others, I'm a disabled upstart. In recent years, I've been practicing to be a perfect upper-class person. I'm very successful. Now, in the eyes of others, he didn't have the aura of an upstart at all. Jiang Joshi said, Wei Wei, I'm also a man. I have dignity. I pay attention to my image. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, as if she didn't understand what he was going to say. Jiang Joshi smiled. Now that I'm limping out with you, I'm exposing my scars. This walking posture was embarrassing and ridiculous. Under the moonlight, his voice was clear and cold, but it was filled with strength. Now, I'm being publicly executed like you. She couldn't dance and appeared in front of the dance troupe. He walked awkwardly and appeared in high society. He had no image at all. Jiang Joshi said, I know you're angry, so I'll make you happier, okay? If I carry you, people will laugh at me when they see my clown-like posture. No one will remember your embarrassing state. He really didn't know what romance was. He wouldn't condone Wei Wei by being dispirited. But he would be a qualified man and protect her. Jiang Joshi squatted a little strenuously, but he still maintained his posture. Just when he thought that Wei Wei Bai would ignore him, a hand pressed on his shoulder. Then, there was the familiar softness of her body. Jiang Joshi smiled and carried her on his back with all his strength. There was still a sharp pain in his leg, but when he went for rehabilitation, the doctors said that he was recovering well. Carrying her on his back, as long as he could endure the pain, it wouldn't cause irreversible damage to his leg bones. He walked very slowly. Wei Wei Bai's face was pressed against his neck, and after a while, it was wet with tears. She said softly, Jiang Joshi, why are you so annoying? Jiang Joshi curled his lips, yes, but in my eyes, you're very likable. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 98. The system silently bounced a sad wasp. The host was crying, being tortured by Jiang Joshi. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like. Chapter 2091. The days were peaceful, quiet, and hard to describe. Wei Wei Bai looked at Jiang Joshi's unchanging gentle face. She felt that she was really tired from all the work she had to do. In the past month, she had been trying her best to torture herself. However, Jiang Joshi was always able to turn her spirit of turning the world upside down and turning it into a warm spring breeze. In his eyes, she was probably just a proposal. It was filled with a bunch of words. Oh, Wei Wei is going to be angry again today. You should be gentle. Oh, Wei Wei is even angrier today. You should be gentle. Oh, Wei Wei is not angry or depressed today. You should do a striptease to lift her spirits. Wei Wei Bai, complete failure. My torture points are stuck at 90%. I can't move at all. The system said that if Jiang Joshi did a few more stripteases, it would probably drop from 90 to 80. However, her affinity level had risen to 99. This was the first time she felt that a 99 affinity level was very scary. The system and the host looked at Jiang Joshi deeply. He was counting the amount of medicine for her every day. No matter what, she had to take it. His eyelashes were drooping and his eyes were deep. One look and one could tell that he was a sly old fox. The system said, "Why don't we practice?" Wei Weibai said, "Even if he is an impenetrable wall, I will dig a hole in it." The system said, "You've said this 20 times. Wei Weibai said, "I don't believe that he's an egg without any cracks." The system said, "You've said this 3 or 4 times. Wei Weibai was speechless. "Don't talk to me. I'm in despair." The system said, "You said this yesterday." Wei Weibai, Jiang Joshi looked up. The darkness in his eyes was gone, replaced by gentleness. "Wei Wei, it's time to take your medicine." Wei Weibai, if she didn't eat, he would disgust her into eating. For example, he would stuff the pill into his mouth and then force it into her mouth. It was so bitter and disgusting that she felt uncomfortable no matter how many candies she ate. Only Jiang Joshi could still smile and ask her if she wanted to continue. He liked this game very much. Jiang Joshi watched her take the medicine and instructed the nanny to pay attention to some things. Then he lowered his head and kissed her hair, saying softly, "I'm going to the office. I'll be back soon." His working hours were now reduced to the minimum. If it wasn't the most important thing, he never went to the company. Even if he went to the company, he would come back as soon as he finished his work. Jiang Joshi flirted with Wei Weibai for a while before he took his suit jacket and crutches and turned to leave. When he opened the door and went out, he deliberately looked back. Sure enough, he saw Wei Weibai looking at him with infatuation. He couldn't help but smile before walking out. When he went out and saw the car, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. Luan Shan was in the back seat, holding a notebook. After Jiang Joshi got in, he heard him say, "Recently, the Qin family's pace has been a little wrong. More than half of the cooperation projects have been cancelled. It's okay. It will be settled soon." Jiang Joshi calmly put on his jacket and buttoned it up expressionlessly. His expression was calm and cold. "Drive." Then he closed his eyes to rest. When he was at home, his attention was highly focused on Wei Weibai. Even when he slept, he was alert. So now he was going to the company to rest and solve his work. Although this kind of day was very tiring, every time he saw the gloominess in her eyes, it was replaced by the light of anger. Is at https://www.sashu.com/ Chapter 2092. He felt that everything was worth it. The Qin family's sudden backstabbing made Jiang Joshi spend some time to figure out how much he had lost. He also found out why the Qin family did this. The head of the Qin family changed to Qin Wanqi's brother. Even if Qin Wanqi's character was rotten to the core, his brother couldn't wait to make her into a fairy. There was no need to talk about the plastic sibling relationship they had since they were young. A legitimate daughter was the best marriage tool for the family. The better Qin Wanqi's reputation was, the more likely it was for her to get a super rich husband. No wonder the Qin family suddenly stopped cooperating with them. Qin Wanqi knew that he was the one who planned to ruin her reputation back then. It was impossible for him not to cause a ruckus when he returned. Perhaps he weighed Qin Wanqi's interests and gave up on cooperating with them. Jiang Joshi opened his laptop and pulled up all the information on the Qin family, including the recent stock market data. Meeting. Luan Shan immediately nodded. What's the topic of the meeting? Jiang Joshi crossed his hands and looked at the computer screen indifferently. His cold face was hidden in the shadows. Acquisition of the Qin family. Luan Shan was stunned and then got up. Okay, I'll inform the higher-ups. Jiang Joshi looked at the information on the screen expressionlessly. He knew that people like Qin Wanqi were very disgusting and paranoid. A woman who could help her brother gain the trust of girls for a long time and then drug them. Not to mention that she was sick, she was definitely vicious. If he didn't deal with this kind of person quickly, did he have to wait for her to come and harm Wei Wei? Jiang Joshi rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. He had encountered many perverts in his life. Both men and women. If he could use them, he would use them. If he couldn't, he would kick them away. It wasn't until he met Wei Wei Bai that he realized why his circle was so sick. It was because he was a pervert himself. So birds of a feather flocked together. And Wei Wei Bai was the most normal, cutest, and softest ray of light he had ever met in his life. Compared to her, even perverts were light. Jiang Joshi couldn't help but think if Wei Wei Bai suddenly became incomparably ruthless and insisted on kicking him away. He was probably even more stubborn than Qin Wanqi. Imprisonment was considered a light punishment. He was capable of doing anything. Fortunately, she was not good at hating people. Jiang Joshi rejoiced from the bottom of his heart. Otherwise, he might not be so normal right now. Because of the Qin family's matter, Jiang Joshi was busy and didn't go back until the evening. During this period, he made several calls home to make sure that everything was fine with Wei Wei Bai. Only then did he continue to immerse himself in the fierce business battle. In the past, these things could excite him. Now, he felt that this was a boring job. He couldn't wait to finish the acquisition case and go home. When he got home, Wei Wei Bai was already asleep. Some of the pills were calming, so she would always go to bed early after taking them. The nanny came forward to take Jiang Joshi's coat, and he also passed the crutch to her. Then, he went to the kitchen to eat some supper, washed himself, and quietly went to bed. She slept soundly. Recently, she had also gained back some weight. There was a trace of blood on her soft cheeks. Her clean fingers were also resting on the pillow, curling a few strands of her long hair. Jiang Joshi carefully hugged her. She was white and soft, with a light fragrance. It was really the best reward after returning home from a day's work. Jiang Joshi couldn't help but narrow his eyes. The gloominess and coldness in his eyes melted. It was just pure nostalgia and joy. It was like a teenager looking at the girl of his first love. In that instant, his heart softened like molasses. It was so good to be able to hug her to sleep like this. And Wei Wei Bai, I feel like I'm having a nightmare of being strangled by the tentacle monster again. I can't turn over. Huff suck sleepy ah. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on at the bottom to record this reading record. Chapter 2093. The Qin family had a lot of crises. Many of the heartless things they did in the past were also exposed. There was a lot of discussion on the internet. Wei Wei Bai went online to look at Weibo when she was bored. Her little angel Weibo was not updated much. After all, her legs were crippled. It was hard for the fans who watched her dance to watch her disco in a wheelchair. So she would occasionally post pictures of flowers, plants, cats, and dogs. She also gained a bunch of fans for no reason. Perhaps she had accidentally placed all kinds of low-key, luxurious pots and jars in her house on the table when she was taking out the flowers and plants. There were benefits to going on Weibo. The system cut off the remote monitoring of Jiang Joshi. She did not know what Jiang Joshi was doing recently. His favorability was frozen at 99. She did not dare to fill it up. Her heartbreak value was also stuck at 90%. She did not move much. She only had less than a day left to complete her strategy. During this period of time, the two of them did not talk about side missions. Even she would occasionally listen to the music of flying bumblebees. The rhythm of the explosion, were they like wild bees when they danced? They were probably having epilepsy. Wei Wei Bai also saw the news of the Qin family on the internet. She searched deeper for other information. It was probably Jiang Joshi who was destroying the Qin family. Because he did not hide his intention to buy the Qin family at all. Wei Wei Bai held the juice and looked at the computer in a daze. Her brain was not working. Jiang Joshi did not increase her heartbreak value during this period of time. Qin family buying. Qin Wanshi, Wei Wei Bai's eyes sharpened. Jiang Joshi was so anxious to suppress the Qin family. Did Qin Wanshi do something? Wei Wei Bai asked the system about Qin Wanshi's recent activities. The system looked. She did not do anything. Every night, she hugged the male lead's photo in the financial magazine and then quarreled with her brother every day. She said that she did not want to go on blind dates. Even if she wanted to go on blind dates, she would go on blind dates with the male lead. Wei Wei Bai, licking Jiang Joshi would leave him with nothing. Was that man someone an ordinary person could lick? She had broken both her legs and her parents, yet Jiang Joshi still had a rational look on her face. And this was only because his favorability was above 90, that he had a good expression. If she could choose her target, she wouldn't have come to attack Jiang Joshi. She would be exhausted to death. Originally, Wei Wei Bai was still wondering if she could make use of the Qin family. However, seeing Qin Wanshi like this, Wei Wei Bai could only give up. She had already become a pitiful bootlicker. Out of her sense of responsibility to protect animals, she did not disturb her. Wei Wei Bai's expression was as calm as the wind. Come, Tongzi, where are you? Let's practice dancing. Host, you have to pull yourself together. Forget it, he had been practicing his dance skills for 2 months, so it was time for him to make a dazzling entrance. Let the host worship his perfect and cool dance moves. That was why the system said, we can only meet when the side quest fails and the punishment descends. Wei Wei Bai said, then I'll practice handstand first. The system said, pull yourself together, don't practice handstand now. You should at least wear pants first. What handstand with a skirt? Jiang Joshi looked at the time and calmly wiped his mouth with a tissue. Mr. Qin, have you signed? In the high-class restaurant, the Qin family and his people had gathered 3 tables of people. Jiang Joshi purposely booked the entire restaurant to give the Qin family one last beautiful dinner. In the future, there would probably be no more money coming in. The head of the Qin family was sweating profusely and his face was pale. He hesitated for a while, but still signed. The Qin family was officially bought by Jiang Joshi's company. /the is at https://m, Sashu. Calm. Chapter 2094. He had no choice but to sign it. The Qin family had done so many terrible things in the past that they could spend the rest of their lives in prison. Without this money, they would be done for. Luan Shan took over a few contracts, and a few of Jiang Joshi's executives also rushed forward. Those who confirmed and those who checked. There were no more problems. They would use the fastest speed to notarize the transfer of ownership and take over the Qin family's company. This takeover war lasted for more than 2 months. It finally came to an end today. As the victor, Jiang Joshi did not have a trace of pride. Instead, he stood up calmly and walked out elegantly with his walking stick. However, Master Qin suddenly said coldly, Jiang Joshi, the winner takes all. You can stand in such a high position, but you are not a good person. How can you be so content? Aren't you afraid of retribution? Jiang Joshi stopped in his tracks and turned his eyes indifferently. His gaze was incomparably cold. However, he was too lazy to talk to this prodigal dog. Instead, he walked out of the restaurant and said to Wan Shan, who followed him, "Hand over all the evidence of the Qin family's past crimes to the police." Didn't the Qin family want retribution? Jiang Joshi thought indifferently. He would give it to them. How could a bunch of trash talk to him about retribution? Jiang Joshi called home. Because of the contract signing, it was already past 10 p.m. and he was not home yet. He wondered if Wei Wei was asleep. The phone beeped and was picked up. "Joshi." A sweet voice came through. Jiang Joshi frowned and his heart sank. "Do you miss me? Since the day I met you, I have been thinking about you every day. I think about you until I go crazy." Jiang Joshi suppressed the trembling in his throat. His voice was suppressed and cold. "Chen Wanshi." Chen Wanshi immediately smiled. "That's great. I called you thousands of times a year, but you blocked all my phone numbers. Now, you are finally willing to listen to my calls." "Jiang Joshi, I can't remember anything like that. Those calls were probably handled by his secretary." Jiang Joshi said calmly as he walked forward. "What do you want?" Luan Shan frowned, but when he saw Jiang Joshi's eyes, he immediately reacted. He hurriedly called the bodyguard and drove the car over as fast as he could. Jiang Joshi got into the car. His fingers, which were holding his phone, were a little pale. Chen Wanshi suddenly laughed hysterically. "I've been waiting for you to say that for many years. Joshi, what do I want?" She suddenly said fiercely, "I want to marry you." When Chen Wanshi roared out this sentence, Wei Wei Bai was almost deaf. She was tied to the wheelchair and was speechless. This was the first time he had seen someone so anxious and fierce when asking for her hand in marriage. Was this an evil female bandit planning to rob Jiang Joshi, a good man from a good family? Ha ha ha. He was lucky that this day would come. Wei Wei Bai suppressed her gloating smile and tried to reduce her presence as much as possible. When Chen Wanshi came, she and the system were listening to the sound of bees flying. After tonight, a year was almost up. Ah! Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. She was wearing thick cotton clothes. Wei Wei Bai was still thinking that Jiang Joshi would come back tonight, so she might as well seduce him or something. At most, she could put some candles on him or tie his hands. With this stimulation, it would be impossible for him to succeed. Then, the main mission would be full. She had to give up the side mission. In the end, she was too engrossed in the music. Chen Wanshi came in and held a knife to her neck. A few fierce-looking men stopped the bodyguards and the nanny. Just like that, all of them were controlled. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "Didn't you say that she was licking the photos?" Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com. Comma. Chapter 2095. The system said, "I didn't know that she would suddenly want to lick a real person." It was indeed an oversight, because Chen Wanshi had nothing to do with the mission, and monitoring required energy. So the system did not monitor her. So when someone came to kill them, he and the host were still in a daze. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, there's still more than an hour before the mission is accepted. If we don't grasp the time well, the side mission and the main mission may fail. The system was silent for a moment, suppressing the fear of the terrible consequences if she failed. Then it said softly, even if you fail, you'll be fine. Wei Wei Bai nodded, not noticing the seriousness in the system's tone. She had so much life points, if she failed to return to a plane, she would just not be able to get life points from Yi Yuxuan. It would not cause too terrible of a consequence. Jiang Joshi was speechless when he heard the words I want to marry you. He held back his chaotic breathing and said softly, I know how you feel about me, but I feel that our personalities are not very compatible, so I don't want to hold you back. Chen Wanqi said, I can change. Do you like Wei Wei Bai's personality? I can learn to dance, I can even go for plastic surgery, I can become her. Wei Wei Bai and the system were speechless. To have such a sick admirer. It was very scary. Jiang Joshi was not moved at all, but when he heard Wei Wei Bai's name, his face paled a little. He had to calm down, Wei Wei was definitely in her hands. He could not let Chen Wanqi vent her anger on Wei Wei Bai. Jiang Joshi tried to suppress the huge panic in his heart, the calmness in his eyes was about to shatter. Only his voice maintained a gentle rhythm, Wanqi, I actually have a good impression of you, when I first met you, I thought you were a good person. Chen Wanqi seemed to be shocked for a while, then she said with joy, really? Joshi. Her voice even became sweet, like a little girl's. Jiang Joshi suppressed the feeling of disgust and continued to try to comfort her. But your brother threatened me and told me not to get close to you because I was just a poor boy at that time. Fortunately, he had been accompanying Wei Wei to read all kinds of deceptive CEO novels recently. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to come up with such ridiculous lies. Luan Shan drove the car very fast. He was about to see the house. After the ecstasy, Chen Wanqi finally calmed down. She went crazy again. You lied to me. If you buy my family, I will no longer be the eldest daughter of the Chen family. I will never be able to get close to you again. Jiang Joshi's expression was very ugly. The car had already stopped. Behind his car, several other cars stopped as well. A group of bodyguards got off the car and immediately followed behind him in silence. Jiang Joshi tried his best to laugh gently. How could that be? It's all a misunderstanding. Chen Wanqi's voice was also incomparably gentle. Even in my dreams, I want to talk to you like this. It's so beautiful, even if it's fake. Jiang Joshi's pupils shrank. He hurriedly sped up and rushed forward. Don't hurt her. Sure enough, Chen Wanqi's voice became sweet. Then I'll kill your little darling, okay? Jiang Joshi finally couldn't suppress his anger and fear. Chen Wanqi, if you dare to touch her, I'll let you die without a burial place. He had already rushed to the door. Seeing that the door was unlocked, he immediately pushed it open. As soon as he entered, he saw the cold blade, which shone with a terrifying luster under the light. // Chapter 2096. The gleam of the knife had already sunk into the weak body in the wheelchair that couldn't resist. Wei Wei Bai, she had never seen such a neat villain. He killed as he pleased, without a single word of nonsense. The system's hand trembled and threw out all the painkillers. Jiang Joshi rushed over recklessly. Chen Wanqi pulled out the knife that had sunk into her body, and bright red blood splattered out. Everything seemed to be in slow motion in Jiang Joshi's eyes. He could see Wei Wei's blank gaze. She didn't even look like she was in pain. She just had a strange look on her face, like a child who didn't understand what was wrong with her. Jiang Joshi swung his crutch and hit Chen Wanqi's face. The knife in Chen Wanqi's hand fell to the ground. She covered her face and howled. As for the people she brought with her, they were entangled with Luan Shan's people. In the chaotic scene, Jiang Joshi had already taken off his clothes and wrapped them around Wei Wei Bai's abdomen. Blood gushed out of the wound. The blood on his fingertips was warm, but it quickly cooled down. It was as if her life was draining away. Wei Wei Bai slowly blinked. Her pale face had an illusory beauty under the light. Her voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Joshi, I'm in pain. Tears gushed out of Jiang Joshi's eyes. His lips trembled. He didn't look like his usual steady self at all. I'll take you to the hospital. It's okay. It's not a fatal injury. More blood gushed out. He picked up the knife on the ground. It was covered in her blood. He cut the rope around her body. Then, he carried her with all his might and limped out. Luan Shan and a few assistants followed. The car arrived quickly. In the back seat, Jiang Joshi and an assistant who knew a little about first aid. They quickly bandaged her wound. If the bleeding didn't stop, he probably wouldn't make it to the hospital. Wei Wei Bai was curled up in Jiang Joshi's arms. Blood was still dripping from her abdomen. Jiang Joshi kept patting her face. Wei Wei, don't sleep. We're almost there. His eyes revealed a mournful despair, all of the crazy emotions hidden under the calm. They all poured out. He hugged her almost hysterically and kept shouting in her ear, "Don't sleep, please don't sleep." Her body was too cold. He looked at the knife. It was the kind with a reverse hook groove that was used for bleeding. When Jiang Joshi saw the knife, he almost went crazy. Wei Wei Bai quietly leaned against his chest and struggled to open her eyes. Her lips trembled. He seemed to want to say something, but he was too weak. He was so weak that he didn't have any strength left. Jiang Joshi didn't let go of any chance to wake her up. He leaned over. What do you want to say? Tell me, I'm listening. Wei Wei Bai suddenly smiled and her eyes lit up. Even her complexion looked better, with a hint of ominous color. I saw my mother. Jiang Joshi's body stiffened and he forced a smile. Really? Wei Wei Bai smiled innocently. Her voice was very weak, but it was soaked in honey. She chose a wedding dress for me. It's very beautiful. There's a beautiful bow behind the belt. She still had the heart of a little girl, still dreaming of a bow. Wei Wei Bai smiled and leaned close to his ear. Silly, I actually really want to marry you. I really want to. Her voice gradually disappeared. The temperature also gradually turned cold. Blood fell to the ground and dyed the two of them red. Torture points are full. Side mission completed. Attack target's favorability is 100. Main mission completed. The host's body has been severely injured, no signs of life, detached from body, the quick red at https://www.sashu.com/quick the quick red at https://m.sashu.com the quick. Chapter 2097. Luan Shan's car quickly stopped at the entrance of the hospital. He wanted to turn around and say that they had arrived so that they could quickly enter the hospital. But when he calmed down and took a look, he didn't have anything to say. Jiang Joshi held Wei Wei Bai's body in a daze. His expression was almost frozen. He was so pale that he looked like he was about to die. There was a pool of blood on the back seat. Jiang Joshi's fingers pressed on the wound. They were terrifyingly red. Blood was still dripping down from the top. Luan Shan, are there any wedding dress shops recently? Jiang Joshi suddenly said, his voice extremely hoarse. Luan Shan cried. Was Jiang Joshi crazy? She can still be saved, Jiang Joshi. She can still be saved. Jiang Joshi looked at him blankly. He was not a fool. He knew what a person's state of death was. Her heartbeat had stopped. Luan Shan had never been so embarrassed. He cried and pulled Jiang Joshi, who was in a daze, and carried Wei Wei Bai to the hospital. But there was no saving her. She was. Just as they entered the operating room, the doctor came out. The rescue was ineffective. Before reaching the hospital, the patient bled to death. Jiang Joshi did not react at all. He knew that she was dead. The moment she stopped breathing, he knew. The body was covered by a white cloth. There was nothing special about it, just like any other corpse. Jiang Joshi wanted to put him in the morgue, but she got someone to open a single ward. His voice was a little hoarse, but he was unusually calm. I'll take a look at her. I'll contact the funeral home tomorrow. The more Jiang Joshi behaved like this, the more Luan Shan was afraid. Wei Wei Bai was placed on the bed. The wound had been cleaned and stitched up, but there was no sign of life. Death came suddenly, without warning. Jiang Joshi was even confused. What happened to her? Why was he lying down? Was he asleep? Of course, this sweet self-deception couldn't even fool him for 3 seconds. Wei Wei Bai lay there quietly. Her small face was the size of a palm, and her thick eyelashes were drooping. It was like a deep sleep. Jiang Joshi reached out his hand and tried to hold her fingers, but her fingers were a little stiff. He tried a few times but couldn't hold it. Finally, he shook his body and reached out his hands to grab her fingers. It was as if he could get some comfort from this. Luan Shan sat blankly outside the ward all night. He thought that Jiang Joshi would cry, vent, be hysterical, or even walk out because she could not take it anymore. But there was none. There was not even a sound coming from the ward. In the wee hours of the morning, the Luan Shan finally couldn't take it anymore. He was also afraid that Jiang Joshi would suddenly take things too hard. Although he knew that with Jiang Joshi's character, love might not be the only one. But Wei Wei Bai's existence was very special and important to him. Who knew if Jiang Joshi would suddenly lose his mind and kill himself to accompany Wei Wei Bai? He opened the door and was about to walk in. But he found Jiang Joshi sitting by the bed. His back was still straight, and his hand seemed to be holding Wei Wei Bai's fingers. He didn't know how long this position was maintained. Luan Shan was about to breathe a sigh of relief when he suddenly saw his face clearly. Shock and sadness flooded into his heart. He couldn't help but whisper, "Director Jiang." Jiang Joshi seemed to be awakened. He slowly turned around, his eyes bloodshot. He seemed to be a little slow. After looking at Luan Shan for a while, he said calmly, "Contact the funeral parlor and order a wedding dress and suit." She wanted to marry him. He also wanted to marry her. Luan Shan looked at his face and hair. His body was trembling. Finally, he couldn't help but turn around and leave. Slash. Chapter 2098. Jiang Joshi slowly turned his head and continued to look at Wei Wei Bai. His expression was even calm, whether he asked someone to contact the funeral home or something else. When he did things, he was still as orderly as usual. There was no trace of sadness, nor were there any emotional fluctuations that disturbed his life. Jiang Joshi forced himself to let go of her hand. He was at a loss for a while. Wei Wei was dead. He still needed to deal with her funeral. It couldn't be too shabby. He had to give her a beautiful funeral. He also had to invite the dance troupe. They were all her colleagues. As he thought about the funeral, he limped into the bathroom, intending to wash his face. His brain was too slow. How could he do things? But when he walked into the bathroom, he saw himself in the mirror. It was so unfamiliar that it was terrifying. Jiang Joshi's hair had a lot of white hair overnight. The black and white hair mixed together, turning into an old and miserable gray. He stared blankly at the heavy blow in the mirror and reached out to touch the corners of his eyes. There were even a few wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. His hair turned white overnight. He aged a few years overnight. He actually encountered it. Jiang Joshi seemed to want to pull the corners of his mouth and laugh at himself. But the corners of his mouth were extremely stiff. In the end, it almost turned into a crying expression. Jiang Joshi didn't dare to look at the mirror. He lowered his head and tried to wash his face. As he washed, he suddenly couldn't take it anymore. Tears flowed out desperately. He reached out to wipe them, but he couldn't wipe them clean. In the end, he finally squatted down. His legs couldn't support him anymore. He sat on the ground in a sorry state. The sound of crying became shrill. He reached out and hugged his head tightly. The desperate and miserable cries seemed to come from every bone in his body. He was like a lone wolf who had lost everything. He screamed with all his might and cried in pain. He no longer had the strength to pretend to be superior, to pretend to be elegant, to pretend to be calm. To pretend that he could endure everything. He couldn't endure this. He couldn't endure this. Wei Wei Bite stood at the bathroom door and looked at Jiang Joshi, who had shrunk into a ball, looking pathetic and weak. The most tragic cry came out of his throat. Others who heard this felt their blood run cold, but also felt pity for them. This was a man who she had pursued until she wanted to die, a man who was terrifyingly strong. He had become a complete loser. The system was still nagging, "I'll undo the red line immediately. If I can undo it, I'll do my best. It won't be a problem for the soul to stay here for a while." After his soul left his body, he would gain 100 favorable impression points. His torture points were all full. She was very calm. She had already gotten used to winning so many times. She would only feel emotional when she failed. Last night, after her soul left her body, she watched him arrange everything in an orderly manner. She thought that Jiang Joshi was still very strong and would be able to handle the matters after her death. But before he could catch his breath, he saw that Jiang Joshi's hair was turning white. It was a mixture of gray and white, and traces of wrinkles also appeared. In one night, he seemed to have experienced 10 years of devastation. And during this process, he just sat by the bed and looked at her corpse. He didn't say a word, and his expression didn't change. But the scene last night was a silent collapse of despair. Compared to any other intense emotion, it was more moving. Wei Wei Bite stood quietly beside Jiang Joshi. She never knew that such a handsome man didn't look good when he cried. She didn't know what happened, but her hand suddenly landed gently on his head. Her hair swirled into the gray strands and passed through her palm. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like that, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.